Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pirate Radio. I am your host who needs zero introduction, and that's exactly what you're going to get. Let me pause that shit. Today, I am joined by a friend of mine. I'll call him a friend, even though we've never met in person. This is Arthur in California. He has a Substack, which is very fantastic. I subscribe to it. I would suggest you do too. He writes lots of really cool articles that are kind of cover a lot of subjects. One of his latest ones was basically revisiting RoboCop and Paul Verhoeven and some of his movies, which was really, really cool. Today, though, we are going to be talking about Africa and the post-World War II narrative and kind of how they're connected. So, Arthur, how are you, man?
Doing good, Rudy. Doing good. Thank you for the kind introduction.
You're very welcome. You're one of the accounts that I don't remember how I stumbled upon your account or vice versa. I was really glad when I did. And I guess a little backstory with us of we've communicated a couple of times, mainly through the Twitters. And I remember you had maybe one or two spaces that I was part of that were really, really interesting. So glad I found your account, and hopefully the feeling is the same. We're going to get into some pretty in-depth topics. We're going to try to keep it broad because Arthur and I both understand that most folks' understanding of Africa is probably from someone who calls himself an African American who's never been to the continent, and there's a pretty good chance that if they ever their ancestry is from the continent, it's probably way, way, way back. So, but before we get deep into the Africa and the post-World War II narrative, I'm going to start off probably with the most controversial question I'll ask you all night, Arthur, and that is, are you pro-eggnog or anti-eggnog?
I really have to say I'm pretty much neutral on the eggnog. I'm not a fan of it. I've tried it before. It kind of tastes like sour milk to me, but I don't begrudge anyone who enjoys it.
Okay, I'll just let you know that anyone that hangs out in the middle is probably worse than choosing a side, but I
Switzerland, man.
digress.
Switzerland.
Yeah, you'll just accept the gold and do the business, but no one will ever hold you accountable for anything you ever do.
Just minding the store, you know?
There you go. It seems to be profitable for them, and quite the thing to do. So, I'm not really even sure where to start on this subject. I will tell you, everyone, that I'm more of a broad strokes. Arthur's actually been to the continent. He's knows quite a bit more than I do. I won't go out on a limb and besmirch his name by calling him an expert. I don't even know what that term means anymore. He'll probably agree with that. But basically, I guess we can start with what kind of parallels or where was Africa as a whole, in the post World War II, from the 50s through 60s, 70s? Were they prospering? Were they colonized? Where kind of were they?
Well, I mean, like you said, not a lot of people have a background of knowing of Africa, the continent, a lot of stereotypes there and whatnot. For myself, I have not been individually to all 54 countries of the continent, but I have been in and around Africa, especially during my military career. And as you pointed out at the beginning of the show, it really comes down to narratives versus the realities. And it's looking at the continent as a whole after World War II. That conflict itself kind of set the stage for the decolonizations and led it towards where it is today. But I think it's a misnomer for a lot of people when they say, okay, well, we went from 1947 to 1991 into the Cold War, and everybody knew how it was going to end up at the end. This was the results, right. And nobody knows how these things were going to go. And when you go into just right after World War II, there was a lot of questions. I mean, you had former colonies of Italy that had to be dealt with because, of course, they lost those. Libya, Tunisia, and other other countries, and so of course you had France and Britain take over for a bit there, but it wasn't all at once either. You know, the independence movement really kicked off in the '60s hardcore. Before that, though, there was a big conference called the Bandung Conference in 1955, and it was the African Asian Summit, pretty much, and that's where the voice of a united front of anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism kind of came out as a united front. And what's amazing on that one is America didn't attend that conference because of all the other particulars in the background going on. Because with the UN just being put together, NATO getting put together, they did not want to well tick off their other colonial holding European countries that were in NATO. So it wasn't just this major rush of, okay, let's get democracy in there and let's fight the commies. You know, that really kind of came a bit later.
Right. The and that's going to be a big part of this whole discussion is that the Cold War got really hot in Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa. Basically, all of those. If anyone's familiar with Central Africa and all of the what would be civil wars later on, it was pretty much every single one of those countries, and there was a lot of, I guess you would say, a baseline kind of a predicate for what would come later on to the West. So I guess I should probably introduce like Rhodesia, South Africa, as it existed before apartheid, or apartheid and before um, Namibia, some of those countries where Mozambique is a big one that they were colonized. They had colonial overlords, or however you want to look at them. They had a lot of the trappings of the Western world, and then once the movement that Arthur spoke to started to happen, those colonies and colonial rule started to kind of falter, and this was kind of the end for the Soviet Union at the time, and even China, if I remember correctly. But basically, communism was coming. And we're all kind of familiar, I think, with domino theory in Southeast Asia and Asia proper. For some reason, it didn't come to Africa. And I think that might be because we were relying on our NATO allies, maybe to quell that. But a lot of things we see going on now started in Africa, as far as, like, what would you say, social movements, woke, if you will. Can you kind of speak to what we would call woke now, like the left side woke, the leftist woke? We kind of saw that coming of age in the post-colonial Africa, didn't we?
I'd say in a way, yes. I mean, there's plenty of literature out there, Black Marxism and whatnot, and not to put a pin on like this is the exact year of that timeline, but I would say in the '60s that was a big push within the kind of Pan-African movement, Free Africa, etc. But at the same time, you have to add in that there's also a lot of nuance and complexity to this, because one thing I wanted to mention as well is too many people say Africa in itself. And let's be honest, there's people that'll say, oh yeah, Africa, and think one country, not a continent that, to my
Sure.
recollection, is what, basically almost the size of 3 Americas put together,
It's
with
huge.
over 3,000 tribes, and to there's always estimates, but it's roughly 2,100 to almost 3,000 individual languages as well, with dialects put in. So it's the most diverse continent, in the world. It's the most diverse place in the world. And what was interesting is, of course, you had the Black liberation, Pan-Africanism, and the Marxism kind of kicked in, but almost ironically, at times during the little proxy wars and during the Cold War there between the superpowers of the USSR and America, that at a lot of times we weren't showing up to say, for instance, Niger or something, going, you need liberal democracy. No, we would say, you need managed democracy. And whoever was kind of in charge, the biggest groups at the time, they would almost kind of just play lip service between the powers. I mean, if the communists were powers were offering more guns, more support, then they'd be like, yes, comrade, yes, we believe in
Right.
this. But if Uncle Sam showed up and had bigger bags of greenbacks, then they'd be like, God bless America, Uncle Sam. So it was kind of they just kind of did the tap dance game at times. And then you have countries like Zaire that had an autocrat for I don't know how many decades, and we supported him until the end of the Cold War, just simply because he hated commies. He was no
Oh
version of
yeah.
democracy or liberal thought whatsoever there at all. It was the CIA was like, well, he's our guy, and he can fight against whoever's in there at the time. The communist influence, the Cuban influences, or Russian. So
It's
it's
kind of like or South America or goddamn South Korea. Excuse me. Where we
yeah.
just they had a dictator for 50 years that everyone apparently forgot because now they're doing really really well, but we were like, well, at least he's not a communist, so we're cool.
Well, and don't forget as well that Korea itself was a colony. It was colonized by the Japanese from roughly, I
Sure.
believe, like 1910 to pretty much the end of World War II.
Right.
And so when that power vacuum there came out, not to go down that rabbit hole too far, but just to say that we saw that China's right there. They're pushing, once again, the domino effect belief, that theory of communism. And, you had groups in the northern part of Korea that were, tailoring to the communists, and they were appealing to that. So we jumped in to stop communism there. And it became, well, South Korea. We helped them write their constitution. We have, I think, last count 10 plus 20 bases. I can't remember how many right now, but let's just say the reality. It's a vassal state of the U.S.
Sure.
It's a vassal state, but it started out as another front against the spread of communism.
Right. And to get back, I'll back into Africa. One of the things I see, or one of the parallels I see, is when you dive into mainly Rhodesia. I mean, that's more of what I know, so I get a lot to that. South Africa, probably rightly or wrongly, however you want to look at it, gets a very negative rap with their white ruling government because of apartheid. Not a good thing, obviously. But you have Rhodesia just to their north, which had a minority white ruling government. And the knock on them, once they declared their independence from the United Kingdom, from England, England turned their back on them, basically, did not recognize them, and basically said they need to have a majority rule government, in essence. So they got zero support, they got cut off. And it was the Africa kind of coalition more broadly that you talked about. They had the Free Africa movement and all of those things, where it really, the parallel sounds very very clear, just on a smaller scale, in places, especially in the United States, where it's like, well, we have to have this police force that has to be 51% black because this city is 51% black, or this school, or this fire department, or this, or congressional district, or whatever it is. We need more black representation in all of these different things. And it's almost like it's kind of the opposite, because black in this country is a minority, and black in Rhodesia, in South Africa, in Africa more broadly, white is going to be the minority almost every time. Um, but it was the same talking points of, we need to have this representation because of skin color, or the way someone identifies, if you will. And it seems like the commies really dove into that. With They were already kind of trying to say that against the United States, and they kind of felt like they took advantage of that and really ran with that narrative. And it seemed to take hold and made, like, any Western country who wanted to possibly support, either directly or indirectly, it made it like white fire hot, and you couldn't touch it. It was basically like political suicide if you were, say, Nixon or Carter or, Johnson or whomever during those times. And I see too, there's another parallel that's kind of shined its ugly head, if you will, that seeing things as a monolith of people, whether it's Africa, I think if you ask the average American Africa and start telling me what person you're picturing in your head, they're probably going to come up with a very dark skinned person, even though, as you mentioned rightly, that Africa is one of the most diverse places on planet Earth, from Mediterranean, basically Greek looking people on the north, going all the way to the south to getting very large swaths of white people who sound funny. And I see that parallel, creating the monolith, treating them as a monolith. I see that same parallel with our modern day Israel. And it's no shot at Israel or anything like that, but there's this belief, there's this rhetoric that Israel is like 100% Jewish, which is completely inaccurate. Even the most staunch Israel supporter or Zionist or whomever will always point out that no, 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 only like 75%, 75 to 80% of Israel is actually Jewish. There is a thriving minorities within Christian and Muslim and various other groups that are within there. So there's kind of that parallel as well. And the it's I don't even know how to phrase this, just thinking about it as I go, but like this whole thing of using these, for lack of a better term, woke talking points in politics, um, is kind of doomed to fail if we take the Africa example, I guess is what I'm getting at. So
Yeah.
can you add anything to that? Agree with that? Tell me I'm stupid. Either
No,
any
no,
one of those three work.
no, no, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because, as you correctly pointed out, too many look at Africa as if it's one country. It's a monolith when it's not. And that book that I've mentioned before we came on the show, The Africans by David Lamb, he was a Los Angeles correspondent over in Kenya and during the late 70s and into the early 80s. And he wrote an excellent book on it. Not every single thing in the book, of course, is gospel or I agree with it, but at the same time, it is a more accurate portrayal of the continent itself as he traveled around talking to actual Africans there, seeing the effects during, of course, the Cold War and post liberation, post colonization in a lot of these nations. That one thing that they get wrong is to look at it as if, well, they're African. It's like, no, that you have, yes,
Right.
you're in Africa, but it's almost as if, imagine we're in the United States. We have 50 states here. I'm a Texan. You're in Oklahoma. There's a lot of
Yeah.
differences there, even if we're only like 3 hours away, hypothetically. So you
Share a
imagine
border.
Africa as having 3,000 mini states there. And one of the greatest, in one excerpt of the book, he talked about when he first got to Africa, to Kenya there, got his place and everything else. Of course, it's as it is now, is probably even back then even cheaper to have, say, a chef, a gardener, a driver. And the first month he was there, he was having just constant problems between his household workers arguing with one another. I mean, just fighting like cats and dogs, essentially. And he talked to a correspondent he worked with there, and the guy says, "What tribes are they from?" And he goes, "What are you talking about? Are they all the same tribe?" He's like, "Well, no, one's this, one's that." And he goes, "Well, there's your problem. Those people never get along." And so
Right.
this misconception of, okay, the colonial powers left and any problems, we're just going to blame it on colonialism, when it's no, it's more complex than that, because you still have the distinct differences and grievances and problems between all these different groups. It didn't go away just because, the European, packed up and pretty much went home. So that was still there. And as you go through and see the multiple civil wars that broke out once the colonists, the powers that left, well, that created power vacuums. For all the complaints and attacks against South Africa during apartheid with the Bantu states and whatnot, you don't have to defend the system to understand the system. You can do a value neutral judgment on why there were separate areas for different tribes that were there and how it was kind of kept kind of in an equilibrium, sort of to say. It's just as, you have the African National Congress in power that took over with Mandela, and we get the wonderful narrative of, liberty, democracy, and freedom. And it's like, you understand that there was a communist party there. It was underground a bit, and all it did was turn into the ANC. And so it's communist powers in charge there. It didn't magically fix everything.
Yeah, I mean, let's take South Africa as the shining example of what not to do. Like you said, we don't have to, back up the prior regime and all of those things to understand that the opposite of what's going on is not the correct thing. By and large, generally is not the correct thing. If you have a majority or a minority white rule and they're doing bad things, well, the complete opposite of giving the majority black population complete control and ruling does not equal out either, because we see the problems that are happening within South Africa. It's probably the most known at this point since Trump held or had their president at the White House and showed him the video, which is so Trump and so hilarious. But it's a failed state. You can look up any number of things on South Africa right now. There's no shortage of CCTV footage from outside of homes. Everybody has a hardened locked gate. There really is no safe spot unless you're out in the bush of South Africa. You're talking about a country that is, God, 30 years ago they had nuclear weapons. It's not a backwards country. It never really was, at least in the last, 500 years, since like the 1600s. Like it was, sure, I guess you could say it was colonized. Fair enough. But at some point, your colonization label has to wear off. I don't know if that's after 100 years, 2, 3, 4, whatever that number is. But at some point, that has to wear off a little bit. And now these people are somewhat native when you're talking about multiple generations. But South Africa has diamonds, it has oil, it has, minerals, it has any number of things that it can be a self-sufficient, self-sustaining country. It's got fertile farmlands, it's got kind of the barren lands, it's got wildlife, it's a gorgeous country as far as the scenery goes and the terrain from all over. And it's a massive country as well with, it's on the Horn of Africa. It's got plenty of ocean. It's got everything you could possibly want in a somewhat decent sized or small country. It's not landlocked. It can do any number of things. And yet it's a completely failed state with brownouts, blackouts, crime, murders. I mean, the worst kind of crime, murders, rapes, all of the things, gang crime. You have farmers. You can search, you could type into Google and South Africa farmer gun, and you're going to get any number of pictures from the last 30 years to 40 years of farmers armed to the teeth with like all kinds of weapons. They had a firearms industry at one point that was really good. So we can look no further than South Africa of what happens when you do the complete opposite of what was going on before. And like you said, we don't have to defend the prior regime, but it wasn't 100% wrong either.
No, and a great example of that is in Lamb's book, once again, came out over 40 years ago. He notes that Africa was at the time the only South Africa was the only African country not importing food. And one of the kind of quiet little secrets was that it was exporting food to other African countries. And this would be a great time to bring up Rwanda. I mean, I know you, Rudy, and myself, we were teenagers when the Rwandan genocide in '94 happened. And I recall, of course, oh my gosh, just the condemnations, the world allowed this to happen. Can't believe this. And even in Lamb's book that came out obviously before the '90s there, he notes that wasn't, Rwanda had already had, I think, 3 to 4 genocides at the time between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And he even remarks how if this had been South Africa doing this, it would have been global news, wall to wall coverage, condemnation coming everywhere. But it was Africans killing Africans. So it was just kind of let go. It was not, no spotlight was put on that one. But if it could serve a narrative against South Africa or, or the colonies, then, it would run in the news. But if it was another African dictator, autocrat, say like, Idi Amin or whatnot, it was just kind of, well, freedom is messy, and they're trying to figure out their way. And it's really, I mean, it's insulting and paternalistic, and just to offhandedly excuse those kind of behaviors.
It's the ultimate racism too. That's another parallel that I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another parallel I see between our current here in the United States and what happened in Africa was, okay, so it's just accepted that on the south side of Chicago on a holiday weekend, they're going to have 100 shootings and 25 deaths. And it's just like, well, that's just kind of what they do. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Why is that not happening in, I don't know, Martha's Vineyard? Or why is that not happening in Austin, Texas? Austin has a very diverse group of people who live there, and they have their share of crime, violent crime, petty crime, what have you. But why is there not 100 shootings on a holiday weekend in Austin, Texas? And if there was, to your point, there would be this huge outcry of like, what the hell happened in Austin? What's going on? We have to do something. You'd kind of rally the troops, if you will. And we just pass off black on black crime as like, oh, well, I mean, what do you want to do? And to me, it's the ultimate racism of, it's the what is it? The low standard. I can't think of the saying.
The
But
bigotry of low expectations.
bigotry of low expectations. Thank you.
Well,
Yes.
and to your point on that one, it gets even more amazing when that's used as a sort of defense. Because yes, when you point
Right.
out the high levels of urban crime, there's a defense to it of going, well, they're killing each other. And this comes from, your supposed liberal progressive sources from the left, and going, well, no, it's still not right. How are you excusing this? I mean, a great example is, I think it was the homecoming shootings, and was it Mississippi, in that one county where it's like 20 people shot at a football game with, I think, 6 or 8 dead. Did you even hear about that?
No.
See, you know what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
I'm sitting here like,
That's a mass shooting. I think correctly. Isn't that a mass shooting when 20 something people are shot and you have, almost 10 people dead afterwards? But
Yeah,
it
I
was
think
black on black crime. So
it's like a riot. It's like 3 or more. It's a riot or a mass shooting. That's
oh
the
no, I was
thing.
being
Yeah.
sarcastic. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I'm saying, we always get told
Right.
about mass shootings. If, I mean, it's horrible when it happens at a school and stuff, but this happened at a school. It was at the football field. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's just explained away and disregarded.
we had I'm pretty sure it was in Oklahoma. It was in a small town. It was last year, the year before, had a shooting in the parking lot of a football game, or at a football stadium during a football game. I think one kid died, one kid was injured. And it was like people freaked out initially on the Facebook, of, that's a whole subject in and of itself. But everybody on Facebook, since, unfortunately I have a Facebook, God forgive me, but I'm able to see, all the local reaction of the local news outlets and the local people in the comments and all that, and they're all freaked out. And then it came out that it was a black student shooting another black student and accidentally hit another. I think it was a black girl got hit in the leg. She was no part of it. She just, crossfire, whatever, or beyond fire, whatever you want to call it. And it just faded. And it's like, wow, it's a shooting at a school. And the second it came out that it was like black on black crime, they're like, well, what are you going to do? Because initially it was like, we have constitutional carry in the state of Oklahoma. So anybody who's 18 years or older, or I guess 21, because you 21 to have a pistol, you can conceal carry or open carry or whatever. Like, it's no big deal. So everyone went in on that initially. And then when they found it was a 16-year-old black kid who shot another 16-year-old black kid, it just faded. And it's like, wow, you guys are so freaking racist. It's ridiculous. Like, it just it you can say the same thing with abortion. I mean, when you look up abortion statistics, it is staggering, not just like this year or last year, but over time, how many black babies have been aborted. And when you go, if you want to find a Planned Parenthood, it's not going to be in the nice neighborhood, if you will, or the supremely white neighborhood. Guess where it's going to be? That kind of tells you everything you need to know. And anybody, politician or otherwise, but especially politician, who dares to mention defunding Planned Parenthood is going to be destroyed in the mainstream corporate media. And it's going to be a problem if you're in the wrong district. You're probably going to lose your seat. So it's amazing in that you know it's I just need to reiterate too that how much I hate the phrase African American for every black person in the United States, and how racist I believe that term truly is, and how short of a lifespan it's had that most people don't understand. I'll tie it in with Native American. Both of these terms were basically made up in the 70s or 80s to apply to some monolith of people, and it's horribly insulting, I would think. And I also would think that it's one of the terms that always comes up, and I can't remember if it was before the show or during it, where you brought up the point of agency within a group of people. When you say something like, we need to have this country needs to be ruled by the majority of this group, it now creates that monolithic structure of a group of people who are all exactly the same. If we go back to like South Africa and Rhodesia as well, which neither of us have mentioned, and we probably should point out that Rhodesia now is Mozambique, so you can close your atlas
No,
back up or
Zimbabwe.
get it, or excuse me, Zimbabwe, bordered by
Sorry.
Mozambique. No, thank you. I always do that for whatever reason. Zimbabwe, which apparently Arthur sent me a message earlier today that their prime minister, I believe, was giving a speech and the power went out. And his like second in command had to hold up basically a giant flashlight so he could finish his speech about the country in their parliament building. So official structure there doesn't even have power, which is just chef's kiss of how it all went there. But to my bigger point was, in those, South Africa fought a war against Angola and later on Namibia, and they also helped funnel weapons and arms and all the other material into Rhodesia when they got cut off during their Bush War. Their ranks were not just white people fighting against black invaders. There was a ton of actual black Rhodesians who were fighting alongside the Sealess Scouts and others, fighting against the commies who were coming into their country. So it kind of destroys this whole monolithic narrative. Now, it's not, again, with the South Africa example, but to apply it to Rhodesia, black Rhodesians did not have the same rights by and large as a white Rhodesian, which we all agree is wrong. But again, the counterpoint to that is, just because the one side is wrong doesn't mean going whole hog the other way is correct. We can look at that here within the United States as well. And I think that looking at Mozambique, it's another one that I don't know, or
Well, real quick, Rudy.
Too. Go ahead.
Real quick, just before I lose my train of thought on this one, a really good resource for this is when Ian Smith sat down with William F. Buckley in 1974. And it's on YouTube. It's a firing line with William F. Buckley Jr., the question of Rhodesia. And there's a striking point within their conversation where, Buckley's talking about democracy and, classic liberal values and whatnot, and pretty much trying to paint Ian Smith into a corner of saying, well, you don't have full democracy. And it was striking to see, Smith go, well, of course we don't. No, we're not going to let the cannibals vote. We're not, and it was not about only letting the minority group, the whites there vote. They were not the only ones who could vote. There were, black
Correct.
Rhodesians who could vote as well, but there were standards there. And what happened afterwards, of course, the world trumpeted in 1980 when Mugabe was quote unquote democratically elected by the people into Zimbabwe, the now renamed Zimbabwe. And we talked before the show, especially about in the early 2000s, where he ramped up his efforts to start seizing the farms, means of production, and taking away from, white Rhodesians who had ran the farms for decades. Their families had run it, and they were just taking it away and handing it off to whomever, friends of the regime there, and how it caused a huge problem with famine, fears of famine, starvation. The world came together, started sending in even more, food aid and whatnot. But even then, to that point, there was still the mainstream of going, well, it's a democracy. Things are great. They don't care about the outcomes. They don't, it's really this false virtue signaling of, well, as long as the tenets of democracy were upheld and whatever their mindset is for it, it's a good. They don't care about the outcomes. Just as long as the process is still there. And it's just amazing how that was the overriding concern. There was no care for the actual Africans, the day-to-day ones there, not at all.
Right. It's the virtue signal with, I'm insulated from the consequences because I live in the United States. So the black guy's in charge, so everything's going to be fine. And if it's not, well, at least we did the good thing of put the black guy in charge for the majority of the country. And it's the same thing you see. I guess we're going to see it in New York City, where they're going to elect a obvious communist. It looks like he's going to win, and as far as I can tell, or as far as I care, good luck. Don't ask me for money, kind of situation. It's that, you're insulated from your consequences. It's the white liberal woman, the wine mom, if you will, that's completely insulated from anything she ever says, anything she ever champions. It's the HR department running a government is what it is, or voting for it. It's the corporate HR telling another country how to operate, and be damned that they're starving, and be damned that you went from, like you mentioned with South Africa, Rhodesia not only had plenty of food, they were a net exporter of food to the world into other African countries, including their neighbors. It's fine because now a black guy has a farm, and so equity has happened, or whatever the hell we're talking about. Or I think that probably, I didn't write it down, but I'm glad I remembered the word equity. It's almost like political equity was happening in Africa from the post-colonial era up through, I guess, now. So the equity movement started, it seemed like, or at least was tried first in Africa. And by the time it stopped or started to show that it wasn't working, we had decided to implement it here in the United States and the West, or maybe it was too deeply ingrained to stop it. But what do you think about the whole equity movement in Africa and here?
I mean, it's a farce. I mean, entirely a farce. I'm sure you probably have heard of it, and many of the listeners here, viewers here, of the documentary Empire of Dust. Have you heard of that one? It's the story of the Chinese representative for the construction company going into the Congo. It came out, I think, 2010, 2011, and he has his Congolese counterparts and stuff trying to build a road, and it turns into just kind of a comedy of errors because nothing is working there. And the Chinese representative is talking to his Congolese counterpart, and he's fed up with it. They show up at the sites, the workers aren't working, they're not doing what they're supposed to. Just nothing is going right. And he just finally blows up on him and says, how come this is happening? Why is this like this? And the Congolese says, well, you have to understand, we've only had independence for 50 years from Belgium. And the Chinese man retorts back. He goes, yes, but they left everything here. The equipment, all this stuff was here. They didn't take it with them. You just let it all, decay. You didn't take care of anything. You didn't maintain the civilization whatsoever. And a funny side note to that is the filmmaker himself is Belgium. And in an interview after the the documentary came out, he discussed feeling a bit apprehensive, of course, being from the country that had colonized the Congo, and he didn't know how the Congolese would take it. And he was surprised when they find out where he was from. You know, I'm from Belgium. The response was, "Are you coming back? Are you going to take stuff? Are things going to work again?" I mean, it was really sad in a way, because it just the sad reality is, people don't like to say it out loud, but there's different levels of civilization. There's different levels of advancement in countries, and especially in Africa itself, that even though it's mean to say that, you know, there was a paternalistic viewpoint to a lot of the groups and people there, it was kind of required in a sense. You know, you don't have to like that it was required or that it's needed, but at the same time, I did an essay a while back about how Africa is kind of on the knife edge of helplessness in itself. You remember when Biden went there and talked and promised, you know, more money, this, that, and the other, and then he wandered off into the jungle, and everybody's like, "Where's he going?" You remember that when you talked to him right before he was out?
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, 60% of the continent gets its food from foreign foodstuff aid. You know, that was one of the big things that came up when, of course, the Ukraine-Russian conflict came up, because the grain from Ukraine, a big part of that goes to Africa. And so you have, one, this continent that, even back to David Lamb's book over 40 plus years ago, pointing out the concerns of the age of the Africans, the explosion of the population versus opportunities and whatnot. And we're seeing it now, and everyone's celebrating, saying they're going to be up to like what, 6 billion by 2100. This economic aid, this food aid, all this stuff, this isn't going to last forever. You know, the
Right.
help's going to stop one day, whether we want it to or not. There's going to be other things that come up, and where are we going to be at there? But as you pointed out earlier, you know, the progressive liberal virtue signal, or geographical empathy, it doesn't bother them. And so, you know, as you go through the Cold War period, millions dying in civil wars over there, and guerrilla warfares and starvations, that's all just papered over. It's like, hey, they got some democracy here, and hey, you know, the Yankees went home, or however you want to put it. You know, so things are great. And it's like, no, there's still a lot of problems here, and you're just avoiding them, but you feel good about how it's going.
And doesn't that point to the other side of this topic of, it showed the unattainable post World War II promise of peace and everlasting prosperity? Because we tried all of these things, and I say we, I mean the West more broadly. We tried all of these things in other places, but Africa was kind of the hotbed for the testing, or at least what we thought we could do: nation building, prosperity for all of the peace, all of the things. And all we have to show for it is $38 trillion in debt. And like you said, at some point, it all runs out. It's all over. And it's not all over just for Africa, it's all over for the United States and the West more broadly when we're talking economically. I mean, what happens when we have finally completely spent ourselves off the fiscal cliff? What happens to Africa? They can't support themselves. They've shown that they can't support themselves with growing food, trade, any number of things. They're all failed states at this point. They're all in some variation of either full blown civil war, or on the brink of, or some form or fashion of that. So, I mean, are we not reading the tea leaves, if you will, of what's happened in Africa and how it's going to bring us down possibly as well?
No, exactly. And what you also had is, and I know I keep going back to Lamb's book, but it's just such a great resource from nearly half a century ago of someone being in the continent and seeing it on the ground. And he starts off the book, he has a selection where he talks about how Africa has enough farmland that it could feed itself, it could feed Western Europe and America if it was cultivated correctly. I mean, he kind of put out a hypothetical of, bring in 1,000 American farmers and the equipment, and this would be the breadbasket of the world. But instead of us, doing that, doing things to actually help them, we haven't done that. We've enabled them, of course. I mean, time and time again, there's been enabling, and a lot of it was just for, short-term gain and whatnot. but it's biting us, biting us in the ass, really. I don't know if you saw the latest bulletin came out today about Niger, of course, saying, do not advise any travel there because,
Oh
well,
God,
it's
no.
Niger. Yeah. But we had a base there. Do you remember the drone base? Do you remember
The
how that
drone
went
base,
down?
yes, yes,
Yes.
sir.
So, sank in $1 billion+ on this, had personnel there to fight, in the Sahel against actual, Islamic terrorism, etc. Whether you agree with it or not, but all those resources, all that put into there. And then, of course, another military junta came along, knocked over the Nigerian government, as they've done pretty much once every 10 years since 1960. And what do? Well, since we had City Park Theater kids in charge of the government at the time, they send, Kathy McPhee and Newland and just basically State Department HR cat ladies to go over there and talk to a bunch of,
Right,
guerrillas in a
right,
nation that's 99.3% Muslim. Like, they're not going to listen to that. That was insulting to them. I mean, anybody, when they talk about, cultural awareness and whatnot, it's like, are you serious? You really thought that these gorillas were going to get talked down to by a bunch of women in pantsuits? I'm sorry if it sounds, rude to say out loud, but that's the reality. I'm sure they do great as an ambassador to Switzerland or something, but you got to deal in reality here. See the world as it is, not as you wish it was. And Africa in itself, it's a bunch of hard people there, especially the ones who take control, because they got to be the meanest ones at times. And
right.
instead, we'll do stuff like that. And then just, as you said, 38 trillion in debt, but we'll just write off $2 billion wasted there and equipment and everything else.
Not only that, the Russians came in still. So
Yep.
it's like everything we tried to do or wanted to do, and we won the Cold War and we did all of these things. And it's like, well, yeah, but Russia just walked right in to, Niger, to Gabon, to any number of places. The French have had colonies in Africa for hundreds of years, it seems like, and they're on the brink, if not fully, of being thrown out. And they don't want to be thrown out. And they've been fighting for many, many years to keep their little colonies and keep their little honey holes of minerals and golds and whatever else they're, and probably oil too. They're on the verge of being kicked out of the African continent, and the Russians are walking right in, and the Chinese are walking right in as well. And being, because they're probably sending dudes over there who know what an AK is and understand that the guy you're negotiating with will not negotiate or try to at least get on your side, is not going to talk to a woman of any stature unless she's carrying an axe and has blood across her and it looks like a warrior and probably, chops up a dude in front of him. He's not listening. They're not listening at all. And that's, you don't even have to be a Muslim African for that to be the scenario. You just need to be, like you said, these dudes are born again hard. If you've grown up in a country that's every 10 years basically has a regime change slash civil war, you're pretty hard. You've seen a lot of death and destruction in your life. So when some Ivy League idiot comes over there in a pantsuit and pump heels and is trying to tell you what you need to do, you're probably not listening. And it's like you said, it's insulting. And I think you would get a lot more out of it if you even sent a guy, God, I don't even know. Even if you sent Marco Rubio, at least he's, presents as a dude. If you sent like Pete Hegseth, all right, well, this dude looks a little capable. He's tattooed up. He's in good shape. Yeah, he's wearing a suit, but I think that's maybe what they expect an American to look like, somewhat, who at least has some balls on him. So I mean, it's just crazy the amount of treasure we've dumped in there, and like you said, we're just writing it off as like, well, hey Russia, enjoy our base and our cool like computer chairs or something. Like it's just it boggles the mind of it.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
real politic. You have to practice
yeah,
real politic on this stuff. As I said earlier, see the world as it is, not as you wish it would be. So you take all these supposed, liberal values and thinking, yeah, we're all equal. And it's like, no, that's not how the world works at all. And I think for myself, at least on my personal experience in my career, I went all across the world, 30 plus countries, et cetera, everything else. And almost, I wish many more people could kind of get out of the American, leave the country, go see how things go at other places, because you get your education real quick on, okay, this is how things actually go. You wish it went a certain way, but this is how things go. And I think that's lost a lot in our discourse here within a lot of spheres, not just on the
I
right, but on the left, especially, and everywhere, that you need to see how the things actually work. Mercury put up, how about Somalia? I
mhm.
mean, Mercury, that's a whole nother show in itself. But yeah, I mean, I did some Somali pirate ops, and it's
Oh
really
yeah.
striking to me the parallel to that of, we were there, of course, doing, maritime security and whatnot. And we knew it was a pirate ship. They would come out. They knew the lines. They knew what they could cross, not cross. Except for that one hilarious time the pirates tried to attack a U.S. warship, and they found out quick on that one. They knew the odds, and the frustration on that deployment was, why can't we just blow them out of the water? We know they're
Right.
pirates. I mean, yeah, there's the distinctive. We have the intel that one actually, that ship there held the guys that took the last ship over, that they had to ransom off. So I don't really have any tears for not to segue too much into the topic of the drug boat stuff in the Caribbean and whatnot, but I don't have any tears on that. Had a lot of buddies who did the drug interdiction ops down there as well, and that was their frustration. Like, we just pretty much kind of follow them and see them go to the port. We know they have the drugs. We know that they're going to make it to America. And folks, we're over 20 years and over 1 million overdose deaths, with another countless families affected by this. If you're telling me that you're crying tears over this, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm more shedding tears for the Americans that have died from it. Because what do you call it when, the poison makers have killed over 1 million of your citizens? I Obama drone struck over almost 4,000 people, and there was just a little bit of outright, oh well, and then of course it would come out in the Washington Post like, well, the White House lawyer said this is all in the up and up. He can strike somebody in Pakistan, anywhere else, and everybody just kind of shrugged and said, okay, but we actually take out the people bringing the poison to our country in the Caribbean, and now it's time to start shedding crocodile tears, kind of like over the Abrego guy. It's the false outrage that really gets to me over stuff.
Yeah, I think well, with the Obama, I think that's where you see the fake. Again, I don't know what conservative means at this point, because if I were someone who said I was a conservative, you would say, "Hey, Obama, that's kind of wrong, especially when you're striking an American citizen. Um, yeah, they might be a quote unquote terrorist, but that's also an American citizen, and that's not cool." And then that's before we get into the whole Gitmo thing and all of that. But I think to Merck's point, or to his comment about Somalia, he actually put that up when we were talking about Rwanda and that genocide. And, I guess I wasn't old enough to really know at the time. I do remember Somalia when I was a kid and it being talked about. But I guess we were there because there was a famine slash genocide, starvation, things of that nature. I don't really know what kind of preceded it, why it started. I just was, I guess, labeled as, you have these rival warlords and they're fighting over these things, and the government's gone and there's no one in control and there's whatever. But basically, I can see where, from the outside looking in, if you're, I guess it would have been Clinton at the time, we had this really bad thing that happened in Somalia and it got on CNN and is really bad politically. I'll be damned if I'm going into Rwanda and we're going to repeat episode 2 of this whole thing. That's just kind of the what do you call it? The cowardice of the politics and the political figure. But to get on the drug boat thing bothers me a little bit, not because if we are actually striking drug runners. I love seeing those videos, to be honest. To me, it's a bigger issue of if we're gonna hit the drug pushers and the guys loading up a boat in Venezuela or wherever, and they're gonna head north, roughly. Um, why? First of all, maybe we should take the $38 trillion we're in debt. Perhaps we could shave a couple of shekels off that and figure out why there's such a market here for the drug. Also, if we get deep into it, of I guess almost conspiratorial, but not so much. Maybe we reel in drug companies and prescribing almost willy nilly opiates, and maybe we stop treating opiates with other opiates. And if we don't have 30 million people, I don't know the number, I just pulled that out of my ass, 30 million people who are opiate dependent, maybe we get rid of the market for opiates and whatever, and the guys who would normally load up the speedboat and head north don't have a market to sell to, and it's not profitable. It seems like there's not any sort of will to cure the problem within, which really, that's the part that bothers me. That's before you get into kind of the slippery slope argument of due process, what have you. I mean, that's a whole nother subject in and of itself, but it's just
Well,
why are we not attacking the root causes of these things? And that plays into the Africa thing. Why not attack the root causes of those things? But, here at home, why are we not attacking root causes? Because we're seeing, Arthur, I don't know, what city you're near or live in, but just here in Oklahoma, just going to Tulsa, where I've grown up, I was born and grown up around Tulsa, and seeing the homeless issue just in my local town is staggering to me. And it's not because of they lost their job down at the plant. These people are yelling with one shoe on, dirtier than hell, yelling at a street light in broad daylight on a sidewalk. So
no, yeah,
I I would like to
I'm
start at home.
exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm in agreement with you on that because one thing you notice when you're overseas, whether it's Singapore or parts of Asia,
Yeah.
you notice for one that the subway is just as safe at 1 a.m. as it is at 1 p.m. It's not dirty, and there's not drug dealers anywhere. And that's what's kind of interesting about this argument. Not to get too far into the drug boats in the Caribbean, but let's say for example, you have your average nice white liberal lady there in front of you going, "Oh, that's horrible," and due process and this, that, and the other, and you say, yeah, you're right. They don't have this problem in Singapore. How about we increase our laws that if you sell these drugs that kill people and ruin their lives, then that okay, that's a death sentence, or it's automatic 100 years in prison, or any type of actual enforcement there of root causes of, okay, well, let's fix that in this country. Oh, they're aghast. They're like, no, you can't do that. Oh no, and then you get some weird libertarian arguments at times of saying, well, people should be able to do drugs. It's like, no, there should be guardrails in civilization to keep it a civilization. I mean,
I I
it's
wonder.
the I was just
Go
going to
ahead.
say it's the hilarity of being in these quote unquote less free countries like such as Singapore, where you're entirely safe all night long and it's clean and it's thriving. It's like, wow, how come Singapore, how come I can tell a huge difference between San Francisco and Singapore? This is interesting.
Yes, there is that, and I wonder, like when you mentioned the white liberal woman, when you asked her the question about the harsh punishment for those things, I wonder if part of that is because she's picturing a black man, and that goes counter to everything possible. Because I guess this gets back into Africa and the kind of wokeness of what's happened in the United States in the West, of that we talk about how there's an incarceration problem, and that too many black men are locked up, and we talk about all of these narratives out there, and that black people, if you're on the right, it's like, well, black men are more um, more more often going to commit a violent crime and be locked up and this and that and per capita, and you get all these nonsensical terms kind of thrown around of per capita. um, I just wonder if her reaction, and I agree with you that that's generally the reaction you get. I wonder if you couch it in a different way. And I don't know how you would ever do this to ask the same question twice to the same person, but if you said, well, if it was your son or your daughter who was sold drugs by this person, would you then, would the death penalty be, or life sentence or whatever, a super harsh punishment, would that be on the table for them? I wonder if their answer would change. But yeah,
I I think they would just fall back on the buzzword programming of that's a fascism or whatnot. You know, it harkens back to this latest. Uh, I call it the Boomer Lib No Kings No, protest. But there was a striking video that popped up online, and it was being used as a kind of heralding. Look how many people are out here, and it was in Portland. And the video shows all these people going along with their little signs, and they are just passing just these alleyways of people in their fentanyl
yes.
states and everything else. And you're going, wow, yeah, you care so much. You care so much about these communities and what's going on, even though you, as you walk by with your, made in China crowns and multiple signs that were created in some warehouse to be handed out left and right for this supposed no kings protest, even as you vote once again for some representative that first got elected in 1978, has multiple decades
Right.
in office. It's a lot of hypocrisy. And a lot of people say, it's no point pointing it out. I'm like, no, it still is, because people I consider like kind of on our side that kind of notices stuff already and see it for what it is. You still got to show kind of the normies, like, this isn't right, correct? You have to kind of point it out.
Well, and doesn't that play into the whole, if I've been using the term, the whole wokeness of Africa writ large, of, well, we're going to talk about all of these things and I'll be damned the consequences. And it's like, well, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. And we're going to tell South Africa how bad they are, even though Somalia is cutting each other's throats and there's a majority rule, if you will, and everything's bad and they're starving to death. But, South Africa bad because the white people are in charge. And it's like, well, um, yeah, as you walk past an alleyway that's basically an open air opium den, and you're just like, no kings. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe probably it's not the worst thing if a bunch of federal guys show up, National Guard, and clean that up. You know, Tucker on his I think his latest episode, um, he played a. I think it was from Portland. It was from Oregon, and I think it was from Portland, where it was a local news report in which the news report was they open up this tent to pass out clean needles and whatnot so people could do drugs, and it was like right in front of a school, and they interviewed local people who were like, it's fine if you hand out the needles, it just needs to be 550 feet from the school. And it's like, you have lost the fucking plot. Like, maybe
Yeah.
handing out the needles in saying, hey, it's cool, go ahead, just shoot up, man, it's great, just don't get any sort of disease or whatnot. It's like, can we spend $10 trying to cure someone from that? Can we arrest them? Can we put them in a treatment facility against their will, and maybe it takes? Can we try that? Like, can we try any number of things? Again, like with the Africa thing, just because this one isn't working doesn't mean this other one that's the complete opposite is going to work. Like, I don't know. Maybe give them harsh reality decisions. Like, if we go talk about Africa and, Zimbabwe is now going to self rule, or is going to majority black rule, that's fine. But we need to have some sort of like structure in place that says you have to do X, Y, or Z to get any sort of assistance from the Western world, United States, UK, whatever it is, NATO. We need these things to happen. If you go and do the complete opposite and you elect a dictator instantly in 1980 until he's overthrown in I think 2002. This is not going to stand. Like this is not. We didn't tell Rhodesia in Prime Minister Smith that you guys had to do these things just so you could perpetuate the same thing against them and run the country into the ground. Like, can we maybe have a little bit of like, I don't know, it's a big check, but it's not endless. I mean, I would put this on the same thing. I hate touching the damn subject, but it's always going to keep coming up. Maybe we should do this with the Israeli government too. Like, hey, we have an agreement here, but also some things are not cool. I mean, am I crazy? I guess I'm an anti-Semite again because I'll be goddamned if our tax money has any sort of stipulations to it.
No, I mean, and that's what we're seeing these days, this conflation between criticism of the government, criticism of the support, the levels of support that we give to certain countries. I mean, it doesn't even have to be Israel, but I mean, specifically, yeah, what are we getting out of this? And I can recall one deployment. You work with the IDF. I'm not going to get too much into it, but you work with the IDF guys. I'm not a fan. Very arrogant, very entitled. And I remember my buddy yelling to the guy, pointing out into the water, going, "That's not your effing ship," you know? And it's just, there's almost this kind of feeling that we're just going to come in and bail out, or we're going to do certain things. Even back to the Cold War, one of the biggest issues there in the Suez, when Nasser and Israel were having a big problem there. And for a moment, everyone wanted to stay out of it for a bit, the superpowers at the time, the US and Russia. But it got to the point, Nasser started sinking ships in the Suez, that Russia was threatening nuclear annihilation for both of them. And so they had to get stepped in. And it's just kind of, are we really helping out as much in that region? We have this semi-annual Middle Eastern picnic that comes along. And not only do we buy the plates, do we have to buy the meat? Do we have to buy the charcoal? We also get yelled at if the food turns out good or bad when there's so many things that we can't control in that area. We never hear this about like what's going on between the Congo and Rwanda right now. No one's on CNN screaming out what is the White House going to do for the Congolese this time or something. But that little region, that little country somehow gets puts a spell over so many things. Like you can be in the Democrat Party and you can be, against policies and stuff, but there's something about being in the GOP right now. It feels, by and large, that if you're against any of that, then you're not allowed in the GOP, and the powers that be will come in and they will fund whoever is going against you. They don't care.
Yeah, it's really sad to see that. It's, and I think you're kind of referencing Thomas Massey right there, whether directly or indirectly, that because he won't back certain things, he's got to go. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that you do much better as having a congressperson than a Thomas Massey or a Rand Paul. And these are like persona non grata now on the GOP because of, I'm not even sure. They get these labels. What's funny is if people were to hear our conversation and talk about Israel and wanting any sort of like, I don't know, mutual beneficial relationship other than it's a democracy in the Middle East, which, by the way, GOP, Republican Party, maybe referring to everything as a democracy and democracy being so goddamn great in your mind. I don't know. I think that's what your opposing party says that we are, but we're not. So why we want to back, quote unquote, democracies as if you're a Republican, I don't know. It's kind of in the name, guys. You're missing, just look down. But what's interesting is we would be called, probably labeled as anti-Semitic for having any sort of criticism over the Israeli government. But no one is going to call us racist for talking about how Zimbabwe is a failed state and South Africa now is a failed state. So it's very interesting to me to watch that happen. to a Tucker Carlson or whomever that dares to question any sort of our relationship with any sort of country, whether it's big or large. Like, I don't know. Um, has anybody ever labeled Tucker Carlson as like anti-Caucasian when he talks about not wanting to fund Ukraine and the dictator that we've helped install over there? It's just really really weird to me how that all works out. And it plays more into the whole like woke sort of politics. As much as I really despise that term, it just kind of comes up constantly. And you had, Netanyahu talking about the woke Reich or whatever, that which is like the worst joke ever, by the way, of like, yeah, the woke right Netanyahu is the guys who constantly like run cover for your regime over there. It's, I don't know, it's just so frustrating. I'm
Well,
curious your thoughts on it.
I mean, we briefly discussed it before we came on the show, especially about this generational switch and divide, and how these, and I hate to say it, but these boomerisms, it's not going to work forever. Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I try to stay plugged in with a lot of groups with the guys there and stuff, and they're not buying it anymore. This isn't this belief that it's the eternal GOP of 1986 or something, or even 96. That's going to be gone. You have all these people coming up asking questions, and even though I look at it kind of as a double-edged sword, the internet in itself, where it's at now, for good or bad, it's put out a lot more information, and a lot more people are like looking into stuff. I mean, just as we talked about, the post-World War II consensus, there's a lot of pillars that are starting to crumble down and go away. And they'll complain about, well, they'll put it in the worst terms or something like, oh yeah, these people love the Australian painter. It's like, no, too many people are just not buying into this world you constructed afterwards. And, it's this liberal worldview is not holding up anymore. And there's too many cracks in the foundation, and it's going away with the boomer generations, really. As younger people keep coming up and looking more into this, going, this story you're telling, this History Channel narrative version of how everything went down, it's not holding up anymore. It's like,
Right.
hold on, we went to save the world from this, that, and the other. Because one of the biggest things to me that kind of took me down that road was, all right, so Britain and France had a security agreement with Poland, and then of course Germany went in there, so they went in to save Poland, and by the end of it all, the Iron Curtain fell and communism took over pretty much half of Europe. The end. Like, wait a minute, what was the point of all that then? Why
They
did
didn't
we
get
do all
Poland.
this?
Right. The your whole predicate for launching the war against Germany failed because you didn't get Poland. The Iron
Yeah,
Curtain got Poland. Who also invaded with Germany into Poland, got
Soviet
Poland.
Union.
Right.
Yeah.
I was writing down a few things because this will bring us into the article piece, whatever my Substack that I wrote about Israel and Rhodesia in the Israel paradox, in that the post World War II narrative was that this can never happen again, which is on paper and out loud sounds like the greatest thing in the world. First of all, the world war of this nature can never happen again. Great, no one wants that. The Holocaust, this sort of mass genocide, ethnic cleansing, can never happen again. Absolutely agree. This can never happen again. But it kind of painted them into a corner. As fucked up as this is going to be for me to say, I'm going to stand by it, because when you held the trials of Nuremberg, you then wrote more rules, and you had all of these things that you came out with, that you could not ethnically cleanse a population, and that this was the worst thing ever. And by the way, the term ethnic cleansing, I don't think most people understand that when they hear the term ethnic cleansing, that doesn't mean killing people necessarily. And by and large, it's not killing people. It's basically just removing them from an area, um, moving them off an area, moving them somewhere else. It's not about murdering them. If you murder them, it becomes like it's a genocide. It's not necessarily an ethnic cleansing. The terms, ethnic cleansing sounds so bad. It sounds like gas chambery, right? So you come up with these definitions and these rules of things you can't do. Well, if you're Rhodesia and you have an insurgency, you're being attacked from the outside, maybe an ethnic cleansing is going to perpetuate your civilization in your country. It certainly happened in the opposite of once the white minority government was out of power, they basically have been ethnically cleansed out and nary a peep is made. And to this point, that I made in my Substack was maybe it's not the worst thing if you're Israel and the government of Israel to ethnically cleanse the people that you see as the troublemakers, whether that's true or not. But you obviously can't get along with them or don't want to get along with them or don't see eye to eye with them. And this is another parallel we can kind of drag to the United States of there still seems to be maybe not a majority, but there still seems to be a problem between Americans and a lot of people of the faith of Islamists in our country. So we came up with these terms at Nuremberg of things you can't do and how horrible it is because we never want this to happen again. But if you're Israel and you're trying to protect your state and your people and have security, is it the worst thing in the world from an Israeli point of view, to take these group of Palestinians and move them to anywhere but there? I mean, yes, I understand what I'm saying sounds horrible, but again, like you brought up earlier, this is narrative versus reality. Is ethnic cleansing a good thing? Doesn't sound like a good thing. Is it the best thing for the long term? Very debatable. If we take the example of Rhodesia versus Zimbabwe, I don't know. No one was starving in Rhodesia, but a lot of people are starving in Zimbabwe.
I'm just kind of laughing because I'm sure you recall as well the irony of it, that for a time there was consideration of creating a state for the Jewish people in Africa. Do you recall hearing about that? That was one of the initial ideas. But within your article on Rhodesia and Israel, I do like the comparisons you make on how we backed Saddam Hussein from 1979 practically till 1988 against Iran. And, that being a veteran of the global war on terror back in the day, to make myself sound as old as I am, but it was even as a young kid looking at this going, hold on a second, you got Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds there. You have all this sectarian, separations and whatnot. Some of these places just have to have the meanest SOB there. And no one recalls the history of even how Iraq was created or even Kuwait and everything else, and how this was all just Bedouin tribes up until, what was it? The Balfour Declaration, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of just started drawing lines in the sand. I mean, Saudi Arabia itself, this House of Saud, because the Sauds were the meanest ones there. So, okay, you're in charge. Here you go. And all that history, all of that background information is just cast to the side, and we get this cartoonish kind of Marvel story of a lot of the history. And Africa especially gets that treatment. I can't recall if I brought up earlier about how even David Lamb in his book there in the 70s saying South Africa is getting criticized every day for the apartheid system. Meanwhile, Rwanda's on genocide number 2 or 3 at this point, and this is going on over here. But this, just selective concern and outrage, like, oh, okay, that's okay. That needs to happen over here. I mean, there's just so many cases of it, and it's so hard to find a standard of discussion on it. And as you say, if you criticize something, then you run the risk of, getting the dreaded slur of you're anti this or racist or whatever. Going back to what I said earlier, these younger generations coming up, especially people who grew up, kind of formative years of COVID and woke and everything else, I mean, we had our kind of just semi moment there, I'd say in the 90s, I recall, of multiculturalism, political correctness, and it was practically laughed out of the room. They even had a movie called PCU, Politically Correct University. I mean, I still recall hearing Rush Limbaugh talking about, no, that's a prostitute on the street, not a sidewalk sex therapist, and that's a garbage man, not a sanitation engineer. And it seemed to have gotten beaten back, but within I would, if I had to pin it down, people don't like it, but have to pin it down roughly around the Obama time frame, things just started moving and the pendulum started swinging further and further to where we got to some really ridiculous points of people getting fired for using wrong pronouns at work. Uh, a big example, that one lady, she had at the time, I wasn't online at all, but I still remember. Do you remember she had like maybe 100 followers on Twitter and she was flying to Africa and she's like, going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, haha. And by the time she
Right.
came back, this huge uproar, she got fired from her job, and oh, that's horrible. And then this year, PEPFAR was in danger of finally getting shut down after 20 years. And oh my God, all these people in Africa are going to die of AIDS. And you're going, hold on a minute.
Right.
Y'all had somebody fired over making a joke about that because of the high rates of infection over there. But now, well, if this program that the US taxpayer is paying for goes away, then they're all going to die. And it's, where's it going to end? Like, I think it's really going to end with a lot of the younger generations coming up. I was very proud of seeing Vance on another subject, with the group chat stuff come out. And he just came out and was like, whatever, we're moving on. Don't care.
Right.
Because you should never cut any blade of grass or cut down a tree on your side just to satisfy your opposition. Just today in the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg's coming out with, I had thoughts on Graham Plattner, and then I met him. And now she's basically defending him left and right. And they're saying how, supporting, who Plattner is, right? The guy running in Maine who had the
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
unfortunate, tattoos. But
Right.
they are defending that to the point of saying, well, it's an act of defiance to support him. And we're not going to worry about that. It's going, you pretended it was World War III over a couple of just bad jokes in a private chat, but this is okay because he's our guy and he's on our side. And once again, I'm not saying that become the biggest offenders of pick a a figure, but I'm also saying like we need to keep stuff in check on the right, especially because I'm not a conservative. I don't. What does that word even mean?
Right.
You stay plugged in politically for all these years and you see nothing's been conserved. Everything is, it's, what's the old joke? Conservatism is progressivism going the speed limit, essentially.
Correct.
And just millions of us are tired of that. And if it's going to be a bit of some radical changes, many are all for it. And it comes down to, as you said earlier, the economics for the younger generations, the cost of living, everything else, though, that's what's important. If that's just kept in mind, if we can make a country where younger generations can have, create a family, have jobs, then things will work itself out. Yeah, there's going to be some kicking and screaming. There's going to be hard times. There's going to be some rough patches, but it comes back down to, do we have a country or not? A great saying is, Western civilization, its greatest gift was not democracy. It was the rule of law. And we have strayed so far from the rule of law, it's not even funny anymore.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the Graham Latner guy that they're defending him. It's funny how their what would you say, their acceptance of Nazis is growing because apparently Graham is fine. Apparently the Azov battalion was fine because they're just freedom fighters against the Russians. Let's see. But Nick Fuentes is the worst thing ever. And then also Donald Trump is a fascist, Nazi, Hitlerian figure. Um, it's like, do you hate Nazis or do you not hate Nazis? Like, it's pretty simple for me. Like, not a fan of Nazis. That's it. Okay, we can move on
No.
with life. Communists, hate them even more. Okay, we can talk about like the delineations between communists and National Socialists all we want, but I dislike them both. Um, I don't know. You can make the case for communism being even worse. Whatever. Separate discussion.
Yeah.
But it's funny. It's funny how their line always adjusts based on the narrative and based on what they think is going to further their grip on power, get them back in power. And I just see the right doing the same thing of like you're doing the same exact tactics. Okay, you can have a discussion with a Nick Fuentes, with a Dave Smith, with a Scott Horton, or whomever, with Alex Jones. You remember when Alex Jones was absolutely like white hot? You couldn't touch him. Like, you can have a conversation with people who differ with you, whether it's Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro. I don't care who it is. You can have a discussion with people, and you should have discussions with people. You should sit down in a room for an hour or two or whatever it is and discuss the things. One of the best Tucker episodes ever is with him and Ted Cruz, because those guys know each other. They've talked before and they went at each other. And that was the best thing I've ever seen come out of the right in my lifetime. These are two guys that are prominent figures on the right, and they're going at each other and they're challenging each other on policy and on different things. And I'll bet you by the end of it, they shook hands and everything was fine. Probably, hopefully. But that was great to me. And yeah, then you can get in the comments in the minutia, and you can say that Ted Cruz won this side or Tucker won that side or this, that, or the other, and everybody can draw their lines. But really, everybody just ends up on the right, and no one says, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. This is going to cost us politically. No one really said that.
Well,
And it's not apologizing for like their side or anything other, but it's like, that's what the right is supposed to be known for. So when you have somebody who is a figure who is controversial, why can't you just talk to that person? If they're that bad, if they're that awful, if they're that vile, won't it come out?
no, you're exactly right. And I'll go out a little bit on the high wire on this and just give a little bit of 2 cents on what I think about the World War II, the post-World War II consensus and World War II in general. That another figure, Daryl Cooper, Martyr Maid, goes on Tucker, talks about Churchill and does not make him a saint, does not, sanctify him and say how great he was and this, that, and the other. And myself and many, many other people are not looking at World War II and a lot of other historical events in our timeline over the 20th century as if it's all just, it's all just fragile. It's like, no, you can't interrogate this. And even though when you say, yeah, well, the Nazis had their reasons for this and the communists had their reasons for that, a lot of people are seeing it as World War II was a battle amongst great powers. There was so much going on. Even if you dig deeper into the history, you see that it wasn't really just like a cut and dry, this side, this ally, that ally. There was multiple global battles going on all over the place. And they just kind of, combine it all into this was World War II because there was this many countries there. But we get into this kind of cartoonish hierarchy of evil where the Austrian painter's at the top, and these people that love numbers right now with SNAP and budgets and stuff, when you point out going, okay, well, this many people died, that's bad, but 100 million died because of this ideology. And well, you had Unit 731 there. And the Western powers were not the only ones to colonize places. I brought up Japan with Korea and Taiwan. Taiwan was their colony as well. And you say there's a lot more nuance and complexity here. And when you just boil it down to like a Barney style kids show, people aren't buying that anymore. And that held for a long time of, well, this was this, and this is how it went. And this is how you have to look at it. This is the official, trademarked version of how you have to see everything. No, not believing that anymore. No, there's too much information out there. These things that held together for the decades, they're coming apart. The 21st century is a new century. You just can't keep going back to that well and say, this is the most evil ever, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, because it just doesn't pass the sniff test anymore. I remember my father was actually stationed in Germany in the early 60s, and late 50s, early 60s. And he's told me stories about it. He goes, the funniest thing was when I got my orders and I was getting ready to go over there, I was thinking that I was going to have to carry my gun everywhere and watch my back. And I got to tell you, because he's nearly 90 years old, and he says, the German people were some of the nicest people I think I've ever met, on this earth in my lifetime. And so, yeah, many folks, it's a meme and it's kind of trite, but it says, did did that one country just everybody all of a sudden wake up one day, go crazy for a little while, and then go back to being normal? So it was just a mass hysteria, craziness. It's like, no, that there was a lot more things. The Weimar Republic, the occupation of France, sending in the troops from Morocco or Algiers, the Ruers, and there's a lot more to it, a whole lot more that set up the conditions. And it doesn't mean that you have to become, a t-shirt supporter of this, that, and the other, but it's more about just looking at things, speaking the truth and walking in the light, really, on going, this is what it is, warts and all, here it is. And I just think more people are waking up to that, specifically for that itself. And after just so many things coming out of us getting lied to over stuff, it's like, wait, you want me to believe everything you told me about this event here? I'm looking at everything.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because the same folks that were so mad at Daryl Cooper for talking trash on Churchill, and when you go back and listen to it, he wasn't saying, they just misconstrue it and create their own sort of like revisionist history based on that episode. But what's funny about those same people who got so butthurt over the myth of Winston Churchill, they also started to do their own sort of revisionist history about Neville Chamberlain and talking about, well, he had to do with Hitler the deal he did because X, Y, or Z. And it's like, oh, well, look who's revising the history now, because forever it was Neville Chamberlain's a coward. How dare he do a deal with Hitler? Blah, blah, blah. Thank God Winston Churchill was around. And then it's like, well, if we're going to talk about Winston Churchill, let's talk about Winston Churchill and what he did in the Second Boer War. Okay, the whole idea of a concentration camp came from South Africa in the Second Boer War. So, it's funny how it brings it right back into Africa and the continent of Africa and so many things that happen in Africa, and no one either knows about it, talks about it. It's kind of, like you said, warts and all. Let's do this thing. Like, foreign policy is not A to B type thing. It never is. It never will be. There's too many parties involved. And now when you talk about bullets are flying and you have allies and all of these different things, it's like, okay, you mentioned Switzerland came up earlier. Well, Switzerland did fire on one country in World War II, and it wasn't the ones wearing the swastikas. So that's all you need to know about Switzerland. And then also you have, France fell. Well, they had a government, the Vichy France government, and we fired on French ships early in the war, basically just to make sure, and so did the British, because they didn't surrender. So we're like, well, I guess they're loyal to the Vichy government, so we got to take them out, or the Nazis are going to use them against us. And so we blew up a whole bunch of Frenchmen in French ships and sunk the bastards while they're sitting in port. So none of this is like just really clear cut and dry. I've said before that, Winston Churchill was the best man for his time. Now, the guy lived a long time. So for World War II, Winston Churchill was the best leader at that time that they could come up with, and he led them through that war. Did they win the war? I guess on paper. When you look actually winning the war afterwards, looks pretty sad, and they've never recovered from it. Honestly, they never recovered from World War I. So they had no business launching into World War II and declaring war on Germany. Now,
No.
Then that's part of the whole history of it. We can look from it. It bothers the shit out of me, too, when, World War II becomes the foundation for all things we should ever do that involve bullets and bombs, because that was the only war where it was like, well, this is clear cut and dry. We won. Those were the bad guys. Man, we're so good, and now we own the world, and it's peace and prosperity for all. And we conveniently forget that probably the most murderous bastard ever to exist is Joseph Stalin, which we allied with him. We didn't overthrow him. We didn't even challenge him. We allowed him to take half of Eastern Europe, and then we sat there in détente with him. I mean, it wasn't officially declared détente until Nixon, but we sat there with him up until the 1980s, early 90s, and we just were like, well, I guess we have to deal with these murderous bastards. Mind you, Stalin had killed millions of people through the Holodomor, through the massacre prior to World War II. I don't think we had to ally with him, but that's a debatable point. We can debate that every day, all day, every day, and talk about it. But why is it okay to debate that, but it's not okay to debate the fact that, well, maybe we should have just let the Nazis take out the Soviets and the commies, and then we could have come in, or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it was okay for the Rhodesians to secure the rule there in Rhodesia and supply most of Africa with food, and possibly even Europe, and possibly, creating a mutually beneficial ally relationship with the state of Israel, in which maybe we don't have to fund Israel with all the money we fund them with. Just a thought.
Well, no, exactly. And it comes down to like maybe this outcome or this process, you don't see it as perfect, but the outcome is better than what happened. And having that debate, just like you said, Rudy, I mean, we want to have the debates, and don't tell people you can't talk about this. That's untouchable. That's sacred. Like World War II, for example, that's our moral guide stick to everything. And that's what's crumbling, because it's going, well, no, as more and more things have come out, more people look into it and see that, well, if and I won't even say lie, but if you did selective omission on this part here, and then this part over here,
Right.
you want me to like fully just buy into your worldview of this is how things should go exactly, and this is how it came out perfectly. You don't bring up the Lend-Lease Act where we were giving the Soviets all that, equipment and everything else. You don't bring up that, oh, by the way, the Soviets were fighting the Finns. Finland and the Soviet Union were basically having a war at the same time. What was that about? Any discussion on that? And say the London Blitzkrieg, the Germans bombing London. All our lives we hear about the brave Londoners, and oh man, that evil guy was bombing the city of London. And yes, it was brave, and it was courage under fire for people to have to live under that. But what you don't say is that started after the Royal Air Force was bombing the villages and the towns, not military targets. And the guy was like, hey, cut this out or I'm going to start bombing your cities. So there was a bit of a tit for tat. There was cause and effect to these things. And yeah, while it does kind of knock a little, dent in the moral armor of history there, it's the truth. It's here's how this went. Here's how this occurred. Just points like that. I mean, just all across the board. Back to Israel, for the longest time, I will admit, up until probably maybe until the last decade or so, I bought into what's our narrative we hear all the time. Those people have fought for thousands of years, correct? We've heard it's a eternal conflict for thousands of years. And for myself, of course, I love history, but I pretty much focused in on, American history, European history, and whatnot. And then you start looking into, the ancient history of the empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Romans, and it starts popping to you like, well, there's a reason they find Roman coins in Syria, and Syria was Roman Syria back then. And hold on a minute. No, these people haven't been fighting over this stuff for thousands of years. No, there was a civilization there with a mix of people of different religions and backgrounds and whatnot. And this kind of really started up back in the late 19th century with the movement of Zionism. And if you buy into it entirely, that's great for you, but you shouldn't, be able to just to freely accuse people of being the worst people in the world if we don't buy into something that just started up less than 100 years ago. I mean, heaven knows, we got to hear about stuff that happened 100 and something years ago all the time. And it's supposed to be like it's yesterday, but you bring up this incident going, well, this is very new. You bring up the massacres in the 1920s. You bring up King David's Hotel, the terrorism, the Latvia affair, and all these other things that are there. And it's ugly, it's brutal, but it's the truth. And that's what I appreciate about people like Daryl Cooper and people like Tucker and people outside of the whatever quote unquote acceptable discourse that point stuff out. And you can kind of really see, once the flack starts shooting at, well, hold on a second. You go in and you do your own research on it, not a crackpot, social media post or a TikTok video, but actual research, getting into the primary sources, and you going, there's truth to this. This is how this went. Like, for
Yeah.
example, that London bombing. Have you ever heard of J.M. Spate?
No.
J.M. Spate was a civilian in charge of the Royal Air Force at the time, and he came out with a book in 1944. And he had to come out with this book because 1944 was around the time that the English, the people themselves, learned that, wait a minute, our boys in the Royal Air Force are bombing women and children. He came out with a book called Bombing Vindicated, Saturation Bombing as a Way to End the War. And it's just, take it for what you want, value neutral. But he wrote an explanation and a reasoning on why they were sending heavy bombers to blow up places like Dresden, to blow up little Hamburgs and little towns, and not going directly after factories and railroads and whatnot. Saying, well, no, this is good. Even though we're going to kill civilians here, it's going to help end this war faster. And there's a debate, of course. You can debate like, yeah, that was great, that was wonderful,
Right.
but not everybody even knows that information. And pointing out that information is not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world is to keep people in the dark.
Well, it's yes, to that point. My grandmother, who's since passed, she grew up. So she was born in 32 or 33 in Germany, in Schweinfurt, Germany. The Second World War, the invasion of Poland, kicked off on her like fifth or sixth birthday. So all she knew was the Nazis. Okay. Now, how much she knew that in a small town of Schweinfurt, who knows? Um, but the point to this story is, in Schweinfurt, they had a ball bearing factory that I don't think I can say out loud because I think we'll get flagged because this is streaming live on YouTube as well. But it starts with an F and it's a derogatory slur, but it's with two G's. So they had a ball bearing factory there in her town. And the Allies tried to bomb that ball bearing factory, which is part of the war machine. No one will ever dispute that. But the Nazis had it very heavily fortified with flak and anti-aircraft and whatnot. So it was a very, when the Allies tried to attack it, they took heavy losses and decided this isn't really worth it. We're going to go to the other towns that, of course, are not as hardened because they have no war material there, no factories and all of those things. Now, to me, that's a viable strategy, especially when you're talking about World War II, what have you. Like, we're trying to break the country, okay? If we're going to break the country, then we're going to break the country. We're going to break their will to fight. We're going to break the war machine when we can, but we're going to break the country. So to me, people talk about this whole moral war, and we can put this on the African wars, and we can put this on, I mean, the Rhodesian War, the Bush War was very violent. It's war, but I mean, it was a lot of things happened during that war. A lot of things happened with the South African wars, and a lot of things are happening currently with the Israel and Gaza war. I just want them to be honest with what they're trying to do, what the end goal is. If the end goal is destroy Gaza, just fucking say it, okay? If you want to ethnically cleanse, if you want to get rid of these Palestinians, if you want to win the war, well, the only way to win wars, and I hate that our country has forgotten this. I hate that Western civilization has forgotten this. The only way to win a war, especially when you're talking about either tribes in Afghanistan, Iraq, or just random pot shot kind of citizens, soldiers, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, but basically entities which don't have actual functioning governments, the only way to win that war is to conquer them. They're never going to sign a peace deal that matters. It's not Germany in 1918 where the citizens are starving and they come to the table and they say, we're out, we're tired of this, and they just take the worst deal ever, which leads to the Second World War. You have to crush the resistance. That's how these things work. You can't go into Afghanistan and say, well, we're just going to take out the terrorists and we're going to also now we're going to take on the Taliban and they were the government. So I guess we have to rebuild this godforsaken hellhole. So now we're in a nation building thing. Go in, kill the people you want to kill, leave, or just kill everybody and take it over. that's where that's the thing, like I said, that bothers me about the Israeli government right now. Just tell us what you're trying to do. Stop this bullshit about we're very tactical with our bombing and our special forces and this, that, and the other. Every report I hear is that the IDF, when they go in on foot, is taking heavy, heavy losses. I understand you don't want to kick the door because it is either booby trapped or there's an IED or they're just going to crumble the building no matter what. So why would we kick the door in and try to clear the building? Great. Level the motherfucker. But stop lying about how you're trying to be very matter of fact and surgical. Just tell us what you're trying. We already kind of understand what you're trying to do. Just do it already. Just do the thing that has to be done, and we can move on with life. Look, it's warts and all. History's going to tell the story. As we've pointed out numerous times tonight, Gen Z, Gen A, even our generation is going to tell the story of the time that Israel did the thing that they did. They're going to be the bad guy in this narrative anyway. You might as well be the biggest, baddest, meanest motherfucker who ever existed and do the thing and at least ensure your security for your state, for your nation for the next 1,000 years. I mean, to me, I know it sounds brutal and it sounds awful, and we in the West are so detached from that sort of reality within the world, which has existed in Africa and other places. We can't view things through anyone else's lens because we're so insulated. We've been so secure for so long in the United States and the West that we can't understand this. Maybe we just accept it, and then Israel is fine for the next 1,000 years. It seems like a viable option, just an ugly one.
Well, exactly. And there's a great parallel that I think that you'll understand. You tell everybody what state you're in, right? I'm not doxing if I say it, right?
Yeah, I'm in Indian Territory, Northeast Oklahoma. Yeah. If anybody wants to pony up, it's cool. You can just look behind me.
So to that point, you've spent your whole life there. So I'm sure you're pretty intimately acquainted with the history of the Indian Wars, as I am in Texas, growing up reading about the Texas Rangers and the Indian depredations.
As much as you can be. Yeah. I mean, I'm there's a lot of falsehoods around them, but yes.
Well, that's what I was getting at is another great book by S.C. Gwynn, which a Yankee from Connecticut wrote a great book on the Comanche Wars in Texas, which I thought was kind of ironic, but he did a great example and job of it. And just as you point out, like, just do what you're going to do then, because we're living with that now. You hear all these sob stories of the noble savages and, oh, I can't believe this. But then when you get in there and you start reading the first person accounts of the settlers that came across, say, a farm that had been set up, that had been granted permission even by whatever tribe was around, and then they show up and it's just the worst type of horror movie scene you could imagine, people basically nailed to the doors and whatever. And then you hear about what had to be done. It reminds me of one of the best quotes from Frank Herbert, the guy who wrote the Dune series and other sci-fi,
right,
where he says, "I know the evil of my ancestors because I am those people. The balance is delicate in the extreme. I know that few of you who read my words have ever thought of your ancestors this way. It has not occurred to you that your ancestors were survivors and that the survival itself sometimes involved savage decisions, a kind of wanton brutality which civilized humankind works very hard to suppress. What price will you pay for that suppression? Will you accept your own extinction?" And when I go back, and it's that living history, especially in Texas, you go up to the markers and the monuments of, okay, here's the Ford massacre happened here in 1872, or this massacre happened there, and this fight happened there. And reading those words, and you're going, you want to condemn my ancestors for fighting for survival. I'm not condemning them. I understand what they had to do. And I think we've forgotten that in the 21st century of what we need to do. So much in the global war on terror, the rules of engagement, things that weren't nice, but it should have been done, but it wasn't. And, there were effects to that, and people got killed or you lost the territory. And that's where it kind of gets down to the point of how we got into that. I'm not going to get too much of a tangent on it, but you've seen the meme where it shows the soldier where he's like, they just want democracy. And then the next panel says, they don't give a shit about democracy. And the last one says, I don't give a shit about democracy. Because, this funny idea that the neoconservatives seem to have, that just 2 caves away from Osama was some Arab Thomas Jefferson ready to jump out and teach everybody the wonders of democracy and everything else going on in that part
Right.
of the world, was a farce, an entire farce.
Completely. And it's the idea of the noble savage has been something that's been prevalent. I literally am sitting within the confines of the Cherokee Nation currently, the 5 civilized tribes, and any number of things. So the biggest thing here has always been the Trail of Tears. You know, the Indians were removed and they were set on Indian territory, which then later became Oklahoma. You know, we discovered oil, so hey, boys, we're going to need that back, kind of thing. So you have the Trail of Tears, which, okay, that's fine. Um, there's 2 ways you can do this thing when you look at the objective reality, and that is we can kill every one of you. There's that. Or we can just remove you from the areas in which we populate, and we're going to move you to a barren territory, and good luck. But you're going to have self governance, you're going to have courts, and you're going to have your own plots of land. Have at it. Okay, so when given that choice, if you're one of the losing Indians in that thing, I think you probably choose the life choice. Okay, so you're going to be moved. Now, the parts that are never told about that, and they even do today, the Cherokee Nation hosts a Trail of Tears bike ride where they bike all the way to, I think, North Carolina, or I don't know. I'm not an Indian. I don't care. So they do the commemorative bike ride every year. Well, my thing is, in the local news always covers it. It's this kind of a good feeling story or whatever. I don't really understand, because my question is, where are all the black people carrying your shit? Because no one has really ever heard of the freedmen in pretty much anywhere outside of Oklahoma, and even most Oklahomans have never heard of the freedmen. Well, the freedmen are the freed black slaves of the Cherokee Nation, because guess who actually moved the Cherokees from the Carolinas to here? It was their black slaves that they brought with them. So
Thousands of them.
yes, absolutely. And those are the people who actually died on the Trail of Tears, in which they are also paid for, the slaves that died when they got here, by the federal government. No one wants to talk about that either. You also have, when the Civil War kicks off, now Oklahoma is not a state, it's still just Indian territory. And most of the tribes were like, yeah, we're cool with keeping slaves, so we're kind of on the south side. Oklahoma didn't really factor into the thing very much. There were a few battles that took place, but you have the slave revolts of like 1847 in Oklahoma, or 1867, I forget what it is, where they made it to like Texas, trying to get to Mexico so they'd have their freedom, and they were caught and then subsequently returned to the tribes here in Oklahoma. So there's that part of the whole noble savage, and like you talked about, where, look, you know, if you're the Comanches and you're killing everybody, which they're killing other tribes also,
Yeah.
this whole thing of like, this was our land. I saw a post again where, you know, you have this group of current American Indians that are flipping off the Mount Rushmore, and I think I quote tweeted it and responded, was like, the reason they hate it is because even with all their mastery of stonework, they could never create that out of stone. That's why they hate it. Which I think is kind of funny and insulting all at the same time. Like, they're making sharpened rocks, and we're like making faces out of giant mountains, so they're just pissed off. But I digress. The tribes would have wiped out the tribes. And like, how many tribes were wiped out by other tribes? This is the same thing with Africa. You know, I can look at, and I have said this many times, that the Europeans liberated the tribes in what would become America. Okay, they still exist. They were broken, but we kept them alive, and we allowed them to exist, and we gave them full-blown rights. We gave them all of the trappings that we brought with us in the country that we founded. Now, if that would have been kind of the perhaps that was the pathway of the Rhodesians in South Africa, it's like, why couldn't that be the map for Africa by and large? You know, the sub-Saharan Africa, Could that not have spread? Could you not have gotten that one little like glimmer, that one little country that did it this way and it's working out great and it just spread throughout the region, even up into the Muslim areas, or maybe it butts up against that. But that could have been the predicate for a greater Africa in which, imagine, I mean, you and I understand, at least on a basic level, the amount of just wealth that exists within the ground of Africa. Imagine the absolute like economic powerhouses you could have in Africa if it just would have gone the other way, if you just would have been a little tougher, a little more aggressive, with a little more backing from the West. Like, why couldn't NATO, and I guess it comes back to the post World War II and the narrative that was false from the get-go of we can't ever do these things ever again because it was done in this one part by this one awful people and we conquered them and we're the good guys, so if we ever allow this to ever happen in any form or fashion again, it makes us just as bad or as evil. Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, and we're back, in regards to the American Indian stuff and everything else. We're just surrounded by these kayfabe narratives. I mean, over here in
Yes.
California, you've heard of Yosemite National Park, correct?
Yes.
You know what Yosemite means, right? Those
I
who
don't.
kill. It means those
There you
who
go.
kill. It's an original word from the Miwok tribe talking about I'll get it wrong, but it's the Awanichi tribes there, because they, when the first Europeans started coming in, they're like, oh, wow, cool. It looks like a half dome. I'm kind of making this up, but of course they saw the valleys and stuff, and they were told by the tribes, yeah, we don't go there. The people there kill and they eat. It was cannibal tribes there, and pretty much,
Right.
of course, some white settlers there, pioneers, like, well, we'll go take care of that, and they did. And all around us, though, we get these land acknowledgments and whatnot. What gets me is when it's from other people, other from who came from groups who did the same exact things. One of my
Right.
favorite sayings is that human nature does not age. You go back to the oldest written histories from the Greeks and everywhere else, you still see the human emotions of greed, lust, anger, wrath. It's all there. And so to take away all the agency from these other groups, especially in America, that they weren't fighting each other and telling this fairy tale of it was kumbaya and it was all
Right.
cooperative. And it's like, no, I actually know the history. I know that the Comanches were really bad. The Caddo, they were pretty good. They were, farmers and fishermen and stuff, very friendly. The Shoshones loved U.S. Army guys. I mean, they were our scouts and everything else. There's moments in history where U.S. Army bases were built in the 19th century to protect one tribe from another tribe because it was a more warring tribe. This is what human beings do. So to really say that, well, it's only the Western man who did this, that is such a cop out. It's like when
Right.
I always get his name wrong. That New Zealand director and actor, he did a couple of the Marvel movies. Tahiti Wadapatu, you know what I'm talking about? He also did What
Okay.
We Did in the Shower. Anyway, a couple years back, they had an Oscars in L.A., and he comes over there, and he's from the Maori tribes, Maoris, and he says,
Mhm.
first, I want us to make an acknowledgement that we are on Chumash land, and he named a few other tribes that were in the LA area back in the day, which is ironic because the Maoris went over to the Chatham Islands and killed and enslaved all the Maoris because the Maoris were the peaceful tribe. It's like, do you not even see how this even looks? Like, you're coming from a tribe that's known for, pillaging, like pretty much the South Pacific Vikings of that era, and you're trying to act pious and act as if, huh? Yeah, I mean, but you know what I'm saying? It's like we,
No,
we
no,
see
yeah,
through we
yeah.
see through this stuff. It's
Well,
ridiculous.
it's the scratching of the surface, tip of the iceberg, just kind of uninformed, and it's it's the wokeness again, again to use the term that I hate, but it's that virtue signal that I'm from this minorities, therefore I am oppressed, and it that applies to the whole African part too, of like they're a minority, therefore they're oppressed. It's like, well, no, 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 they're not a minority there at all. Like they're kind of the majority. Like to go, well, they're a minority here in the United States or in Great Britain, so therefore they must be the minority there, or because, you know, England or the United States, we had a slave trade a few hundred years ago, therefore we owe it to people who were never even part of the slave trade historically, that we have to, like, you know, capitulate to them or give them or do whatever. Like, we have to make this up to them. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not how this works. Like, the ripple effect of this is going to be felt forever. You're going to destroy that whole place that has, you know, no country comes up through perfect means. Any country that's trying to come up through perfect means, you've never heard of. And that, again, will apply to the, you know, post World War II Africa, of like, how long until, like, South Africa literally doesn't exist, it gets renamed or so. I mean, how many countries in Africa have been renamed in our lifetime, you know, in the last 40 years? I mean, it is crazy. And Sudan is now North and South Sudan, or Sudan and South Sudan, and it's about to be just like South Sudan, or they're going to rename it to, fuck, I don't know, Muhammad or something. Like, it's about to go through another sea change, and no one seems to, like, care or understand that this is not, like, this shouldn't be happening. And with all of the things that we have created in the Western world, be it the law, be it written language, be it, you know, any sort of philosophical things, governments, armies, any number of things, economies, you're telling me that we can't possibly give one thing, like a system built on laws and kind of carrot or the stick, if you will, hopefully the carrot, but based on incentive. You're telling me that we can't go to Africa and create a better Africa that supports itself, and we could do trade with back and forth, and we never have to give them one more dollar again? I don't buy that. I really don't buy that.
You know, that reminds me of the old joke. It's been around for quite a while, but how many countries are in Africa? And the answer is, you know, like 48 to 54, depending on the day of the week. Right. Because just as you say, it's more of like, what can you hold? What can you not hold? And to just continuously do this self-flagellation of Western civilization itself, it's a farce. And it's just too many holes. It's like Swiss cheese. Too many holes are getting poked into the narrative of you trying to say how horrible and awful this group is, and it's at the top of the hierarchy of evilness, when it's human nature. Everyone, this is how nations have been built. This is how it's formed. You know, you could pretty much put that on anything, from immigration right now to any types of benefits, entitlements, and whatnot. It's more and more just realizing America it's not an economic zone for the globe. Its initials are USA, not GDP. And it's kind of that's been forgotten. One of my recent essays, to segue just a little bit, a sidestep, it's called "The South, California, and Cultural Equality." And for myself, I've lived out here for nearly 20 years, but I still visit the South, go back home once or twice a year in that time frame. So it kind of gives me that dual perspective of what they consider a good blue state versus the red states, if you will. And this article was about a New York Times roundtable discussion, how they were talking about there is no Trump without the South. And it had all of your usual stereotypes of the South. They pretty much were, you know, pretending that, you know, that's
howdy,
modern,
y'all.
Yeah, modern day plantations dotting it today, with aristocrats lounging on a veranda, sipping iced tea as they look out. But the funniest thing to me was this one writer, and I've followed him for years. I don't want to say I hate read him, but just read it for pretty much the LOLs. His name is Jamil Bowie, and he's been at the New York Times for a couple of years. And he says, I also want to say that part of the allure of the South is a cultural object. And this is getting back to what Tressie said earlier about cost of living, is you can move to, say, Texas, have a big compound, drive a gigantic vehicle, and use all the resources you'd like, and boss people around. And he's acting as if people, you know, move to the South to play out their dream of being a you know, Captain Planet villain or something or whatever. And he talks about how great California is because at the end of the day, if anything, it has cultural equality. Remember that word, equality again. And I got to tell you, been here a long time, and there's a lot of great things about California. Don't misunderstand. I'm not knocking the entire state, but it is nothing but cultural enclave after cultural enclave after cultural enclave. Do you really think like Marin County up there in the Bay is, just as equal as, say, Modesto or Fresno or Bakersfield? No,
Right.
there's broad lines all over the place. There's inequality everywhere here. There's not even a middle ground. You're making it or you're not. And the reason they do that, though, the reason the left does that, when they talk up the blue states, even if it's inadvertently, they're utilizing Schmidt's friend enemy distinction. If it's a blue state, it's a friend. You don't talk bad about it. It doesn't matter how bad the crime is. It doesn't matter how bad the economic opportunities get, poverty, you name it, down the line. It's going to be talked in a good way because you're a good and virtuous person if you're from there and you're on our side. But those people in red states, like, gross Louisiana or Texas or Georgia or the Carolinas and stuff, those are bad people and they need to be condemned forever. You know what? Better yet, we need to take their monuments that they put up over 100 years ago. They need to be taken to Los Angeles, mutilated, and then put up for display in a humiliation ritual, that kind of thing. And it's just strict down the line of friend enemy. It goes back to Graham Plattner we're talking about. The only reason they're defending him is because he's on their side. It's the same thing with Jay Jones with his text messaging of talking about hoping, death on his opponent and death on the kids because they're going to grow up to be fascist. It's on their side. That's it. And that's one of the things I was getting at earlier about we don't need to play by the opposition's moral framing. That doesn't mean that there cannot be discipline in the background or something, but you don't torture your side to the pleasure and amusement to the other side. That's just not how this is done. That's they talk all these platitudes about politics. It's like, no, politics is the opposite of warfare. It's the gentleman way to do this without resorting to violence. So yeah, it's winner take all on this. I'm really
Yeah,
excited to see what happens with the vote, the VRA, the section that should go away.
yeah, it's one of the things that really bothers me about the other side, whatever that is like they allow their opposition to set the rules in the playing field. It's like, you see this stuff. You just see it with the Tucker Fuentes thing of like the left has set the moral framework for how things are supposed to work, and then the right uses it against themselves constantly. And you bring up Jay Jones, who's running in Virginia. One of the things that is going under the radar is you have Abigail Spanberger running against Winsome Sears for governor. Abigail Spanberger, Democrat, white liberal lady, going against Winsome Sears, who's a Republican. Black conservative. I assume she calls herself a conservative. I'm going out on a limb there, but she's a black woman running against a white woman. Well, what does the right do? They talk about how, oh, this is a strong, powerful black woman running for governor of Virginia, and it's like, you guys are playing the game. If it was flipped, that's exactly what the left would do, is like, look, we have this black candidate. She's running against this white man. Yeah, she's never accomplished anything, and she was a horrible prosecutor, and she's actually like more Jamaican than she is black, but we're going with black. And it's like, why would you run on this identity politic? Like, does she have nothing to run on? Because it doesn't work in reverse. The chess pieces, or the checkers pieces only work one way. It's not even chess. That's even a stupid analogy because they're playing a game that you don't have pieces for. And so you're going to try to play the game with them. It's like your gun doesn't have any bullets and they have a tank fully loaded. Like, you're never going to win this. Stop trying to play that game. Go on offense. Stop trying to play defense. You mentioned it earlier. It's just conservatism, just progressivism going the speed limit. And it really is. And it drives me nuts because, you have a figure like a Donald Trump, love him, hate him, indifferent, whatever it is. You have to acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump should never have gotten to the presidency once, let alone twice. I think it's more monumental that he got there the second time. It's more impressive in many ways, but that's not the point. The point is that that figure is so beyond the pale of anything you or I have ever experienced in political office, especially the presidency in our lifetime, possibly ever. We may have to go back to like Andrew Jackson type, and even that, Jackson had a name, was in the, general. He was in the government without being in the government. So this is a like once in a lifetime political figure that has no problem running against the grain, obviously, and he's being reined in, like rhetorically by his own side, and it like just take the man's lead in how he won. He ran against a woman who had all the pedigree, everything going for her to be the next president. She was in line. She was going to walk in 2016, and he beat her. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. Same thing in 2020. You have a black or minority candidate who's part of the regime, going to come in, going to do all these things, and he beat her. I mean, he's 2-0 in fighting women. That's a pretty good streak. I don't care who you are. But you have all of this political capital, all of this momentum, and you're just going to ruin it by going, well, the lady in Virginia that's a Republican is black, and that's why you should vote for her. It doesn't work.
So two thoughts, one on the Virginia race and then on Trump. The first thought on the Virginia race. For the progressive left, it's platitudes, not principles.
Correct.
I'm sure you saw that the NAACP endorsed Spanberger over Winsome. And, that should be something like, well, wait a minute. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that's what it stands for. Yet they're endorsing the liberal white lady. Okay. Totally makes sense. Yeah, totally in line with that. Sure.
As white as it gets, by the way.
Yeah. But with Trump, and this keeps getting missed. And yes, it's been pointed out a few times, but the bigger point of it is he's not the cause of a lot of this. Whether you like him or not, he's not the cause of the animosity. He's a symptom of where the country is at. Because for a lot of us growing up in the 90s, and seeing, it's Donald Trump. I mean, he's been a figure in our lives, within popular media and whatnot for, our entire lives. The real estate guy from New York, and, seeing him on talk shows like Oprah, seeing him in Home Alone 2, seeing him selling pizza on commercials, getting his own show on The Apprentice, having that for how many seasons? And, he flirted with a run in 2000 for president. He talked about it multiple times, and everybody was like, oh, okay, cool. And then as soon as this guy comes out, the entire arsenal just comes out against him. And then they're telling us how racist he is and how this and all these horrible things. And you're going, wait a minute. Hold on a second. You're telling me that, you platformed this guy on TV, NBC, everywhere else. He was all over the place for decades. Now, all of a sudden, you want me to just turn around and believe, oh, man, well, actually, he's been this the whole time. He's been wearing a skin suit. Like, they even tried to, knock him on being married a few times. And it's like, no. I was there in the night. I was following politics way too young. And I remember, when the Lewinsky affairs came out, and how the justifications were, that's his private life. That has nothing to do with politics. Why are you going after him? And so you want to tell me that I need to condemn a guy because he's been married a few times? I look at his kids and how they turned out. And so far it seems, well, he did some things right. I mean, you may like them or not, but they're not, dropping cocaine all over the White House like some other people. They're not making videos with underage. Anyway, you know what I'm saying? It's
right.
There is no standard. This is our guy. And what's forgotten is when he came down that elevator over 10 years ago, all they focused in on him saying some bad things about illegal people that come across the border. But if you go to that transcript, because he talked for like a good almost 20 minutes, and I've read through the entire transcript, and what is pointed out, what was heard from a lot of people are the people in the towns that got hollowed out by NAFTA. The people in the towns that got hollowed out when the Rust Belt turned into the Rust Belt. The people that were given all these promises by the GOP about how, this is economic prosperity and things are going to happen great. He pointed to that. He pointed to the economics of it. He pointed to, this is America. Our citizenship should matter. And that spoke to a lot of people. And it might be the people in areas of the country that, the progressive left and all the elites don't like at all. And they're, of course, they're also mad because they felt the betrayal of, wait, this was our guy. He was in the back rooms with us. He knows how this system was working. One of the best things is when he had that, when he had the debate with Hillary, and she says, talking um, about the tax, the tax codes and stuff. He goes, yeah, because I paid, because that's how this works. People get, this is how this is all working, and it's not doing you any good as an average American. And so it's pretty simple that things are not going good in this country, and it hasn't gone good for a long time. And so you have your cloud people and dirt people, and the dirt people have been neglected for so long that it's just, they were willing to give the presidency, not once, not twice, possibly 3 times. Won't get into that, but they put him back in again, and every day supposed outrages from mainstream media. For a lot of us, I mean, I follow it because that's what I do, but I know for many don't care. Don't say what you want, whatever. Boo however you want. We've seen what makes you cheer, and especially over the last 10 years. And so it's just on deaf ears now. It's like, hey, I'm not one of the trust the plan, everything he does is 16, D chess, but at the same time, something's got to happen here.
Yeah, it's that plays into the post World War II narrative of come home, get a good job, have a good income, have a house, have a family, have a car, have a wife, have all of the things, have good kids who then go on and have a wife or a husband and a house and a car and a good kids and the family dog and all of the things, and like you mentioned with NAFTA and all of the other international trade agreements that completely hollowed out middle America from Milwaukee down to Midland. Like it completely hollowed out all of the flyover states, and then once it got to the Rust Belt and started to hollow them out, it's almost like when things started to change. I remember here in Oklahoma in the 90s, we had a Quickset and Black and Decker factory in in 2 little towns that no one's ever heard of, and a lot of people in the state have never heard of and couldn't drive there even if they had heard of them. But you had factories that were supporting these little towns, and when NAFTA hit, Black and Decker and Quickset, which was the same company at the time, but 2 independent factories, moved to Mexico almost immediately and shut down those factories and completely hollowed out those towns and fired all those people. You're talking about thousands of workers. You're talking about thousands of families, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Then, if you take into account, okay, if the factory employs 1,000 people, well, somebody's got to haul the trash. Somebody's got to bring in supplies. Somebody's got to do all these other. So there's all of the subcontractors and sub businesses and sub economy that goes along. So those people have to eat. Those people need to buy groceries. So the grocery stores, the local cafes, this and that. You have churches, you have car dealerships. You have all, you got to repair the cars. So you have all of this other commerce that revolves around this whole business, this whole factory, and they shut it down overnight and move it to Mexico to say, it's the Ross Perot, the giant sucking sound. Well, we heard it loud and fucking clear in Oklahoma, the giant sucking sound, and it hasn't stopped. You have all of this, and I was one of the, my family wasn't affected by it, at least not directly that I know of, but when I heard Donald Trump in 2015, or 2015 or 16, whenever he came down the escalator and he started
15.
talking, yeah, I remember, I can't remember all of that speech, and I'm glad you brought up the transcript, and I need to go reread it again, but I remember listening to it, and I'm like, just like you, I had grown up with Donald Trump, and then The Apprentice, he was on TV like all the time, whether it was his actual show or it was like the Entertainment Tonight's or whatever, the dude loves the spotlight.
Guest appearances all over the place.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did Saturday Night Live. He did any number of
Fresh
things.
Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah, that one's funny. I've watched that one recently. That became how he got known. But it's like when he started talking in that press conference when he announced his candidacy, because I remember when he was like talking about running in 2000, then in 2004, and was talking about the Green Party or this party, and they didn't really have their stuff together. I remember all of that. I was like, man, I don't know. Just because you do real estate in New York doesn't, you're not a statesman or you're not a president. You know, you kind of have these thoughts. But when he talks in 2015 and he started talking about it, he was like immigration, the hollowing out of America. You know, he talked about Charlottesville. You know, and that's of course where the fine people hoax came from. But it was a very clear and concise of a news event that had happened like 10 minutes ago, and he had a very clear view on the whole thing, and then talked about, if you start with that statue, what's next? Is it Thomas Jefferson? Is it George Washington? And I'll be goddamn, from, you know, his mouth to God's ears, that's exactly what happened. What, 4 years later, that you're tearing down statues of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington.
And Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
It
mean,
just went down the line. You know, he goes, where does
yeah,
this end? This is our history. And
of course. He was 100% correct. Now, none of us knew that that's what was going to happen 4 years later, but no one could go, oh, he's absolutely wrong, he's insane, he's losing his mind. He was just doing this whole thing down the line, and you're like, okay, this guy can be a president. Like, I'm listening. I'm full on listening. And then when it was, I think it was South Carolina in the debate, when he looked at Jeb Bush and he said, your brother lied us into a war. We should have never went there. It's cost us money, lives, all of the things. And everyone, you know, all of the political, basically all the people who were calling for Tucker to be canceled because he talked to Nick Fuentes, all of those same people that night went, well, that's the end of Donald Trump. And then you saw the numbers just spike. And the dude, that was it. He had sewed it up at that point. He was going to be the nominee. And they couldn't believe it. They were all in disbelief. I still remember him talking about it. Even, I think there was a debate after it, and they're like, yeah, no, he can't recover from what he did last week. It's like, I don't know. I've seen the numbers, and the veterans love it. And, like, that whole thing worked. And it's like, why can't, you're right. He's a symptom of what's going on. He is the anti-Obama, and that's exactly what I wanted in 2016, was an anti-Obama. Like, I don't know, the economy kind of sucks. Maybe this guy can figure it out. Let's let him figure it out. And he won, and you know,
I
can
think
he
even
correct the things? Maybe, I don't know, but at least he's trying it. You
yeah,
know, someone's actually trying it for once.
I think on even a bigger picture of that is he wasn't only the anti-Obama, he's the anti-cardboard cutout of conservative Inc. GOP. You know, being the loyal opposition at all times, and no, we can't do this, and that can't happen. And yes, you can just do things if you have somebody in there who has your back, who supports you. And I'm glad you brought up the thing when he talked about the Iraq Afghanistan stuff, because up until then it was almost verbatim. You couldn't say that this was bad, or this was a bad idea if you were considered, a person on the right, because no, the official storyline is, that's what we went there to do. We went there to build nations in the desert and everything else. And when he goes, no, this is ridiculous. And nobody got fired. No one was held accountable. And as you point out, me and a lot of my fellow vets are like, yeah, nobody did. And it was pretty pointless. And we lost people over there for what? For nothing. Another friend dead in a dusty hovel in the desert for what? What did we gain out of this? You can't even say we got the oil, because we didn't get the oil.
Right. We didn't even get the oil.
I mean, one thing on that, just real quick, what amazed me though, and it's been pointed out before, that it is kind of funny in a way that, O.W. Bush, it would not have been too hard for them to fabricate some weapons of mass destruction. Like, here it is. So it was kind of surprising they didn't just be, kind of put the wool over our eyes again over something, when it was like, nope, none of that was here at all. Okay. All this happened. And yeah, Trump itself, I mean, if you really want to kind of distill it to the most simple answer for 2016, at least, why did he beat Hillary? Because people believe that he actually loved America, that he actually cares about this place. I mean, Hillary herself, I mean, so much baggage anyway, just politically on that one. The senator from New York. Oh, was she born in New York? No, she went up there. Like, oh, reverse carpetbagging? What is that? From Arkansas to New York? And there was just so much fakeness to her. And I mean, it's the same thing with Kamala Harris as well. That one in itself, I mean, I've been around the politics of California long enough. She was known around the state as the prom queen candidate because she was just propped up there. I mean, it started in San Francisco all the way up to being a senator. And then, of course, you remember the primaries. She dropped out before they even had a vote in California, because it was already known she wasn't even going to win her own state. And then she was picked directly off of demographics and woke speak data to be the VP. And then, of course, now I mean, we all knew, but Biden hasn't been around in his mind probably at least since around 2019, 2018 or so. And she gets shoved in there, and now the new narrative is, well, I didn't have enough time. And it's like, no, honey, more time would have been even worse. You didn't go on any hard hitting shows. You didn't answer questions. I think she really lost it when she went on The View and they asked, so what would you have done differently if you'd been president? Anything different from Biden? And she's like, no, no, nothing at all. Like,
Yeah,
wait a
nothing
minute,
I
you're
could think
running
of.
on, you're running on this change candidacy. You go and pick. Actually, the other thing too is as soon as Tim Walz was picked and Newsom didn't step up, or they didn't actually pick any actual kind of heavy hitter on the other side for VP, that kind of gave it away to me that they were just throwing up an airball. They're like, yeah, here, get Timmy Walz, because there was no substance to that. And I mean, JD
Yeah.
Vance with his debate against Walz, I mean, his face turned into a meme, for crying out loud. His expressions, they just kind of threw in the towel on this election. And the other thing too is they couldn't I don't want to say the word rigged because it wasn't rigged, but they couldn't change up through the courts and have the different rules set up the way it was in 2020 with the mail-in ballots. There was a lot of factors involved that weren't there this time around.
You
So
you can say rigged. That's what it was. I mean, it's just not rigged in the way that Trump has even not really articulated rigged. When you use all the levers of power at a state level against a guy or any candidate, that's rigging it. I mean, it's just once you get into the weeds of it, it's pretty obvious. Pennsylvania being the most glaring example, but that's obviously
well,
that's a completely
Biden getting the
different.
most votes in history, more than Obama, is the biggest example. I mean, I wasn't a
Well,
huge Obama fan, of course, but I'm going, you're telling me that this shuffling old man got the most votes in American history?
right, right. I
Come
mean,
on.
in 2008, I think both of us can obviously see it was Obama. It was the Democrat election to lose, especially with McCain in there. But Obama just, I mean, when those two are on stage talking, it doesn't matter. He could be reading the phone book, Obama could, and he's going to win the debate because it's absolute disarray economically with the wars, with everything. I mean, it's just, you've had 8 years of a Republican president, and we're not in a good spot. He didn't even have a platform. I mean, I remember going on his website. I hate to admit this, but I voted for John McCain. But I remember going on Barack Obama's website, and it's like, okay, well, let's see what his policies are. And it was like energy policy. Well, we're going to create new forms of energy. I'm like, okay, that's great. What are we going to do tomorrow? And
Yeah.
it's like, none of that. We're going to divest and create new forms. Like, oh,
You're like, great.
well,
A wind farm in Tulsa is not going to change the whole state economy here.
Well, that's the thing is like that's not even a new technology. Like that's like the
No.
oldest technology, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, buddy, but yeah, um, I don't know. It's
Well, no, I bring that up because one of the New York Times columnists, Tressie Cottom, so that's one of the things she brought up in the roundtable, that there needs to be new ideas in the South for the Democrats. I mean, a wind farm, for example. And I'm thinking, what, a wind farm in Mississippi? What is that going to do for Mississippi? What are you even talking about?
does she not? This is a thing too. Is like, does she not know that the South was Democrat controlled up until what? I don't know, 1976 or so, 72.
Oh,
Basically, Nixon broke it.
shoot.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It's decade after decade after decade. And yeah, it's a fairy tale. They have to tell themselves a fairy tale, and it's the narrative, of course. Democrat good, Republican always bad, forever and ever, amen. Even with their faults and stuff and everything else, and I get that, but I'm saying that's the story, and it has to stay that way. That's why I said earlier that's why California can do no wrong, because for one, look how many electoral votes, look how many votes there are here. So it doesn't matter if, oh, I don't know, say the Palisades in LA are on fire and burning to the ground. It's still the best run state, and it needs to be the model for the country. That's
yeah,
their slogans. Yeah, it's just
it's
slogans,
unfortunate.
platitudes.
Yeah, it's just platitude on platitude, never any substance. It's like trying to eat air and gain calories. It just doesn't work. At some point, you just die. But they found a way to keep surviving. But Arthur, my man, we have done 2.5 hours of this. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. But I'm gonna grind her to a halt here and wish everyone a good night and a happy Halloween. Got any last words for everybody?
Yeah, just let everybody know you can follow me on X, Twitter, however you like to call it, at Arthur Returns, two S's at the end. And as Rudy pointed out 2.5 hours ago, I write a Substack. It's Arthur and Callie's Thoughts, and I try to just cover a lot of ground there. I do politics, of course, but also stories from the military and just observational essays. So go check it out. And
And
thank
I
you
can
again, Rudy, for
attest.
having me on. Really enjoyed this.
You're welcome. We'll have to do this again, and I will attest that Arthur Substack is really good, and it does vary. You will be surprised at some of the stuff he writes about, and it's pretty quick reads. It's not like essays for 2 hours or 20 minutes. It's usually like 3 to 5 minutes if I remember correctly. So it's pretty quick hitters and very entertaining. But I'll have all of that. I'll put everything in the show credits for you, where you can click a link and follow his Substack or his Twitter or whatever. But everybody have a good night. And Arthur, thank you again, buddy. You have a good one.
Yes, sir.